us at any time. I'd like to begin by noting some important requirements. First, House and committee rules and practice will continue to apply during hybrid proceedings. All members are reminded that they're expected to adhere to these standing rules, including decorum. House regulations require members to be visible through a video connection throughout the proceeding, so please keep your cameras on, and remember to remain muted until you are recognized to minimize background noise. If you have to participate in another proceeding, we ask that you exit this one and log back in later. In the event a member encounters technical issues that prevent him or her from being recognized for their questioning, I will move to the next available member of the same party and will recognize that member at the next appropriate time slot, provided that they have returned to the proceeding. Lastly, in accordance with the attending physician's most recent guidance, all members and staff physically present in the committee room today are required to wear masks in the hearing room, except when you're speaking, and that goes for witnesses as well. Furthermore, all members and staff who have not been fully vaccinated must also maintain 6-foot social distancing from others. Members will, however, be allowed to briefly remove their masks, as I said, if they have been recognized to speak. With that, we shall begin with my opening statement. I want to start by thanking our distinguished witnesses for joining us today for this vital hearing on the state of the global supply chain and its impact, grave impact, on small businesses. The ongoing COVID-19 pandemic is what we hope is a once-in-a-generation crisis that has created massive economic challenges for businesses and consumers alike. An extraordinary increase in demand for goods has exacerbated the many weaknesses in our supply chain, which predated this pandemic, and has inflicted chaos on supply chains worldwide, delaying the delivery of critical goods and products. The complexities of the global supply chain are often unseen and underappreciated, especially in an age where consumers have come to reliably expect rapid delivery of goods and products. That a port closure in Shanghai can impact a hardware store in Chaska, Minnesota is not a reality that lends itself easily to a soundbite on cable news or to political posturing in Washington. We are here today because we have a duty to investigate the challenges facing our small businesses and, using what we've learned, come together to address them. As I mentioned, the COVID-19 pandemic has exposed cracks that have long been present at nearly every connection point in our global supply chain. And this is adding considerable economic stress to small businesses which are already suffering from the economic fallout of the pandemic. COVID helped create the perfect storm for the disruptions that we've seen over the past 19 months, adding to dwindling natural resources, climate change, workforce development problems, trade wars, and a lack of investment in our infrastructure, which is undermining the entire foundation of the international and domestic supply chain. What's more, as our economic recovery has picked up, these problems have worsened. Private businesses whose operations slowed during the height of the pandemic are now struggling to keep pace with a steep rise in demand as the economy roars back to life, putting even more stress on our supply chain. All of these factors have combined to create difficult circumstances. Disruptions have led to supply shortages, backlogs in major ports, and terribly severe delays in delivering goods, as we all know. These disruptions are not only harmful to consumers, they also can be disastrous for small businesses. Small companies have limited inventories and cannot afford to wait weeks or months for the products or supplies that they need. At the same time, they often depend on lower prices from overseas goods, making the skyrocketing costs of imported materials prohibitive. These higher costs might be manageable for bigger enterprises that can absorb the higher shipping costs and negotiate favorable terms with shipping companies. But small firms engaged in international trade have no choice but to accept the prevailing market rate. Throughout the last year, surveys have shown that over half of small business owners feel supply chain disruptions are hurting their businesses. I've heard from many of them directly. In fact, Ranking Member Van Dyne and I met with several personally, including one of our witnesses here today when she visited my district this past September. So we must take a closer look at how weakened supply chains are hurting small firms and our economy, and what Congress can do to strengthen them. By making our supply chains more resilient, we can help ensure the uninterrupted flow of vital goods and prepare ourselves for future potential disasters. As part of that, I believe the federal government must work closely with the private sector to find solutions. I stress, find solutions. We understand the problems to alleviate that pressure on our supply chains. We also must look to existing measures that we can utilize to help small businesses with issues surrounding the supply chain and foreign trade, which is one reason I look forward to hearing more about SBA's State Trade Expansion Program, that aids entrepreneurs as they market and sell their products overseas. I'm on a mission to get to the bottom of this issue, and I commit today to work with Chairwoman Velasquez, Ranking Member Van Dyne, and the White House to make certain that this administration is doing everything in its power to help small businesses weather this terrible storm. With that, I'd like to yield to the Ranking Member, Ms. Van Dyne, for her opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I very much appreciate you gathering this subcommittee to discuss such an important and timely topic. Just last month, I appreciate the opportunity to tour businesses in Chairman Phillips' district, as he mentioned, and discuss how supply chain problems are affecting businesses all across the country. These issues are particularly harmful, as the chairman mentioned, to small businesses who lack the purchasing power, diversified supply networks, robust contingency plans, and pricing flexibility to be able to compete with larger firms. NFIB's recent Small Business Economic Trends report found that 90% of small business owners saw supply chain disruptions that are having an impact on their business. Additional reporting has found that nearly 50% of all small businesses have experienced product delivery delays from their suppliers. 25% of all small businesses has come to slower delivery times to their customers. And the same study also found that supply chain disruptions might cause approximately 20% of all small businesses to rethink their current supply chain. As help wanted signs are becoming a common sight on the doors of small businesses and local communities across the country, and store shelves have become increasingly bare, the American people are taking notice to these Democrat-induced economic crises. For example, a recent survey found that 85% of American adults are concerned that supply chain problems may lead to shortages of basic items. And just let me give you a few examples that we've seen in national news headlines recently. Wall Street Journal, supply chain bottlenecks elevated inflation to last well into next year. That will last well into next year. NPR, dual challenge, combating the shortages of labor workers and supply chain breakdown. USA Today, grocery store shelves bare. These products may be hard to find due to supply chain issues. New York Post, supply chain woes forcing toy manufacturers to scramble to meet Christmas demand. In my home state of Texas, a local Dallas News headline reads, businesses have never been this stressful. Supply chain issues hurting small businesses in Dallas. Supply chain disruptions have left small businesses paying more of their hard-earned money for goods that they may not receive for months on end. The Job Creators Network September monthly monitor poll found that higher prices coupled with inflation continue to be the leading concern for small businesses. And make no mistake, Americans are paying more for just about everything. The Biden administration's labor crisis is also a key contributing factor to the rising costs of goods and empty shelves. The worker shortages have hindered the ability to get cargo to shore, unpack these much-needed goods, and find truck drivers to transport the products throughout the nation. U.S. employers across all industries are struggling to fill more than 10.4 million job openings to meet rising consumer demands. And the NFIB reports that 51% of small business owners have unfilled job openings. Again, 51% of small businesses have unfilled job openings, compared to a historic average of 22%, which is a 48-year record high for the third consecutive month. America's economy is being held hostage by Joe Biden's supply chain failures. Last week, the president's very own chief of staff referred to inflation and supply chain disruptions as, quote, high-class problems. Additionally, Secretary of Transportation made jokes about supply chain issues and how they could impact Christmas gift giving for all Americans. This smug small business negligence within the Biden administration is unfortunately a reality that will crush businesses all over this country that depend on increased sales and spending during the holiday season. Simply put, small businesses are left to bear the brunt of President Biden's supply chain crisis. Inflation is skyrocketing. Cargo ships stocked with thousands of containers are circling U.S. ports with no available slips to unload, and small businesses cannot find workers. And without the products or workers, store shelves across the country are becoming increasingly empty. And while we're holding this hearing, the Biden administration continues to minimize this crisis and seems confounded by the seriousness of our supply chain issues. The challenges that we're facing and this administration's blatant inability to address it go far beyond a slightly less Merry Christmas for the rich. Supply chain problems are keeping not just toys, but medical supplies, oxygen containers, and basic necessity out of the hands of all Americans. And when you couple this with the devastating inflation and escalating energy costs as colder winter sets in, President Biden's policy will literally cost American lives this winter. This is the undeniable reality of what we face in the months ahead. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today, and I hope to work with my colleagues on real solutions to support our small businesses and secure America's supply chain without enacting legislation that authorizes large amounts of new money and fails to combat overregulation, labor shortages, and taxation. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Van Dyne. The gentle lady yields back. I'd like to take a moment to explain how the hearing will proceed. Each witness will have 5 minutes to provide a statement, and each committee member will have 5 minutes for questioning. Please ensure that your microphones are on when you begin speaking and that you return to mute when you're finished. With that, I'd like to start by introducing our witnesses. Begin with Mr. Kevin Lowe, the Sales Director for Ready Rock International. Ready Rock is the industry leader of large block retaining wall systems and has been expanding its footprint across international markets thanks in part to the SBA's STEP program. Mr. Lowe has been instrumental in taking Ready Rock from a business from zero export sales to a global market leader. Prior to joining Ready Rock, Mr. Lowe served with the United States Coast Guard. Appreciate you joining us, Mr. Lowe. Our next witness is Mr. Chris O'Brien, the Chief Commercial Officer of C.H. Robinson, a third-party logistics provider located in the heart of my congressional district. C.H. Robinson is committed to solving logistics problems for companies large and small across the globe. Mr. O'Brien has been with the company since 1993 and has worked his way up from a manager in Raleigh, North Carolina, to president of C.H. Robinson's European division, to now senior vice president, and now chief commercial officer. And we appreciate you being with us today, Mr. O'Brien, remotely. Our next witness is Ms. Christine Lantinen, the president and owner of Maud Borup, Incorporated, a women-owned and veteran-owned company reinventing classic sweets, profoundly committed to sustainability. Maud Borup, founded in Minnesota in 1907, has a long and delicious history, including chocolate-covered marshmallows in my great-grandmother's drawer. Ms. Lantinen purchased the company in 2005 and revitalized and reinvigorated a great small business, which has brought about 150 different products to market. Ms. Lantinen has received numerous awards for her work, including SBA Small Business Person of the Year. We welcome you, Ms. Lantinen. And now Ms. Van Dyne will introduce her witness.
Mr. Falk is a Tampa-based, Florida-based small business owner with 40 years of experience as a custom home builder. Mr. Falk is also the National Association of Home Builders 2021 chairman of the board. He has been active in the NAHB leadership structure at the local, state, and national levels throughout his career, and as a senior life delegate, he has served in the leadership of the association for more than 20 years. He was named Builder of the Year by the Tampa Bay Builders Association in 2006 and 2009, and is a past president and lifetime director of the TBBA. He was also president of the Florida Home Builders Association and continues to serve the association. In 2019, he was inducted into the NFHBA's Florida Housing Hall of Fame, and he received the Florida Home Builders Eagle Award in 2012. Mr. Falk joins us today as unprecedented increases in supply chain disruptions and lumber prices have crushed the American workforce over the past year and a half. As we have seen in more recent weeks, these issues continue to harm small businesses, home buyers, and the housing industry alike. Home builders like Mr. Falk are facing prolonged delivery times, skyrocketing material costs, and escalating labor shortages. We appreciate you and the other witnesses for joining us today as we explore this critically important and timely topic. And I look forward to your testimony, and I yield back.
And I join Ms. Van Dyne in expressing gratitude to all of you. And with that, we'll begin with Mr. Lowe. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Phillips, Ranking Member Van Dyne, and members of the subcommittee. I thank you for the opportunity to testify before you here today. I am truly honored to be here. My name is Kevin Lowe, and I'm the director of the customer engagement team at Ready Rock International. At Ready Rock, we believe in changing the world in concrete ways by unleashing the possibility of people, products, and technology to create large block retaining wall systems that you can trust for a lifetime. Today, we are working with 120 independently owned and operated concrete manufacturers around 22 different countries around the world that license the Ready Rock precast product and provide great retaining wall systems throughout. We provide one integrated solution of wall solutions to create engineered solutions behind the wall and natural stone appearances on the face of the wall, creating like 1-ton Legos to build fast retaining walls. Currently, Ready Rock employs over 55 hardworking team members with positions in welding, production, marketing, engineering, and finance and sales. We manufacture our products in beautiful Charlevoix, Michigan, and export containers to different countries around the world. Our headquarters is just down the road in Petoskey, Michigan, and Little Traverse Bay on Lake Michigan. I want to start by saying that because of the State Trade Expansion Program, also known as STEP, and the U.S. Small Business Administration and the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, MEDC, that Ready Rock went from almost zero export sales, becoming a global market leader in our industry. STEP was a catalyst for us to invest our time and resources into international trade. And as a result, Ready Rock has grown our export revenue to more than $3.5 million in all these 22 countries. These exports have allowed us the freedoms to get good paying, hardworking jobs, diversify our sales, increase our market share, and continue manufacturing in the state of Michigan. This has allowed us to work through the global pandemic without eliminating any positions. We could not have achieved this success without the support of the STEP grant and MEDC. Just a quick story that goes with this is that our very first employee, Larry Pop, has been with the company since we started in 2000. As part of the international growth initiatives, Larry's son, Owen, now works for the company, helping us in our manufacturing facility, becoming our first and only multi-generational employee working with us. We're seeing similar generational success and impacts in the international as well as in France. Our customer, Le Chaux-Baton, had a gravel business that struggled through the recession of 2008 and in the years following. When the next generation took over the family business in 2013, they were hungry to innovate. That's when they chose Ready Rock. As a result, this family business has seen year-over-year growth and is invited to the French Palace to receive an award for invitation from our product. Ready Rock has allowed small family businesses to thrive in the next generation, and the STEP funding has been pivotal in helping us empower small business growth here and also abroad. Small businesses like us, we don't have those resources to be able to navigate the global market and export process. That's where our partners come in handy. With MEDC and the federal trade agencies, they're absolutely crucial and vital for a company like us to succeed in this market. During the pandemic even, we quickly had to shift our operation strategy to continue to grow our exports. Through the STEP program and MEDC, we participated in several virtual trade tours and events and looking at potential buyers in Australia and also in Peru. We were able to utilize Zoom, build our relationships, and in the end, we secured a new customer in Australia because of the work that they were able to do to help us. We are still working on securing our exports in Peru. It's a work in process. Typically, these sales would have required extensive travel in these countries to take between 6 and 12 months to finalize. But with the help of STEP and MEDC technology, we were able to secure the export system. I want to conclude by expressing my strong support for the STEP program. It's been vital for our ability to grow as a small business. We strongly support the reauthorization of the program and continued funding of the STEP program. We would also advocate to increase the funding to $50 million per year. This is good money spent, and we so appreciate that as a small business. In addition, we strongly support the bipartisan infrastructure bill and investing in our aging infrastructure. This will help ensure we can remain competitive in the global markets while also creating support jobs here in Michigan. Thank you for this committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear here, and I look forward to your questions.
Thanks, Mr. Lowe. You make me want to buy a retaining wall. I love it. Now, Mr. O'Brien, you are recognized for 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Thank you. Chairman Phillips, Ranking Member Van Dyne, and members of the Small Business Committee, thank you for the invitation to testify at today's hearing. As one of the nation's largest third-party logistics providers, C.H. Robinson has a unique view on how goods and commerce flow from manufacturer to consumer. My name is Chris O'Brien, and I'm the Chief Commercial Officer for C.H. Robinson. I joined the company 29 years ago, and I've been the Chief Commercial Officer since 2015. I'm responsible for overseeing our customer strategy, and I lead our marketing and external communications functions. We were founded in 1905 and have grown to over 15,000 employees globally. We're Minnesota's 8th largest publicly held company headquartered in Eden Prairie. We serve customers of all sizes, but we provide critical freight transportation services to over 60,000 small businesses and assign their freight to a network of carriers that includes over 50,000 active small business trucking companies. Freight Quote by Robinson, based in Kansas City, includes a self-service tool made specifically with and for small shippers. In the global trade area, we operate similarly. We simplify a complex international landscape for our customers by connecting them to the world's ocean and air freight capacity, as well as customs and trade support. We do not own any commercial trucks or container ships ourselves, but rather build technology platforms and logistics services that allow our customers to save time and money. This is especially beneficial to small businesses who we empower with our pre-built tech to give them an advantage of larger companies. The congestion in the supply chain has been well documented, but I want to describe the factors that influence these outcomes. Over the course of my 29-year career, the fundamentals have not changed. Supply of capacity and demand for goods ebbs and flows to create conditions either favorable for the flow of goods and lower freight costs, or conditions that challenge the flow of goods and increase freight costs. Economic growth, weather, labor availability, regulation, and other factors push and pull on the demands of available transportation. Capacity in the form of trucks, drivers, ships, and ports adjusts over time to these market signals. For example, right now we are seeing the surge in formation of new small trucking companies. What makes 2021 unique are the orders of magnitude and speed which with the system has gone from one extreme to the other. The world's supply chains simply weren't built to handle the near shutdown of early COVID, followed by the rapid restart and the robust consumer demand that followed. The current supply chain congestion is creating challenges for our large customers, but the impacts cause magnified personal stress for small business owners. Like large businesses, small companies have experienced significant and rapid freight cost increases across all modes of transportation, shipment delays, port detention charges, difficulty assessing available capacity, and supply chain challenges have forced all businesses to make painful choices regarding passing on increased costs to their customers. As many have said, the current supply chain challenges are complex and with few easy fixes. We would encourage the committee to focus on four primary areas. First, stimulative economic policy and COVID reopening has driven surging demand across the economy. U.S. GDP growth has exceeded 6% for 2 quarters in a row. Freight congestion and cost increases have naturally followed. We feel that if economic growth continues at higher than historic levels, trucking, ocean, air, warehousing, and port capacity will be challenged to keep up. Secondly, our industry has been dealing with a shortage of truck drivers that predates COVID by decades. Policymakers can help truck driver shortage by focusing on driver quality of life investments like truck parking, driver recruitment, and training. Many new truck drivers and warehouse workers are recent immigrants, and there are opportunities to increase participation within that workforce. We support both the Drive Safe Act and the Women in Trucking Workforce Act, which would expand the driver pool. The China trade war has increased costs in the form of tariffs and high-priced inputs on many small businesses. Small businesses are asking themselves tough questions. Are tariffs likely to continue or expire? Congress and the administration can provide more concrete signals to small businesses regarding the direction of the trade war so they can make long-term decisions. Immediate trade relief for small businesses was included in the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act. The Trade Act of 2021 would be retroactive to December 2020 and could mean Section 301 exclusion refunds of tens of thousands of dollars in duties for some small businesses. Next, COVID-related shutdowns of facilities here and especially abroad continue to adversely impact supply chains. Lockdowns, partial shutdowns of ports and manufacturers has continued to add to delays periodically and recently. Truck parts sourced from overseas have also seen shortages from foreign factory shutdowns, and this delays repair and takes capacity off the road. Finally, many small businesses who hire motor carriers are unaware of the risks they take in selecting them. Some shippers shy away or exclude small trucking companies from business opportunities to mitigate this risk. We would encourage members to support H.R. 3042 to establish a motor carrier selection standard to increase safety and protect small businesses and shippers and small business truckers. Thank you for the opportunity to share our views, and we look forward to the questions.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. And now I recognize Ms. Lantonen for 5 minutes. You've got to unmute.
Thank you. All right. Chairman Phillips, Ranking Member Van Dyne, Congressman Hagedorn, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the honor of testifying today. Before I discuss my business supply chain challenges, I'd like to give you some background on myself and my company. My name is Christine Lantonen, and I'm the president and owner of Mod Borup, a candy manufacturing and food gift company. We're a privately held Minnesota-based business employing around 200 team members. The company's growth has been strong and steady since I took ownership of the business in 2005, and this year we're on track to grow sales by 75%. Modborp is over 100 years old, and like me, it has deep ties to Minnesota. I grew up a farmer's daughter in La Center, working as a server at the American Legion at the age of 13. I joined the Army and attended basic training at the age of 17 and went on to serve almost 10 years as a medic. I graduated from Minnesota State University, Mankato, and after working my way up the corporate ladder, found myself in a unique position to acquire and lead Modborp. Today, as a certified woman and veteran-owned business, we are deeply committed to our community, with our corporate office located in Plymouth and our factory in La Center. I was asked to join today's hearing to share my perspective and experience navigating supply chain challenges. I begin by placing a spotlight on our workforce. My business faces a dire shortage of workers. At 200 employees, we are down roughly 100 from our optimal number of staff. Since December of 2020, we have instituted a 36% hourly salary increase, and we still have trouble recruiting workers. Some factors driving this situation are economic. Our general community maintains a low unemployment rate, almost a full percentage point below the state average of around 4%. Other factors are geographic. We are located in proximity to peer businesses competing in the same worker pool. Perhaps most relevant to this committee is the factor of worker development. Trade programs producing certified truck drivers, welders, and other specialists are not producing workers fast enough for businesses like mine to hire them. I urge this committee to take a hard look at policy solutions to accelerate the pipeline of trade certification and education programs. To put it directly, the biggest and most immediate challenge to my business's supply chain is a lack of workers. The situation is so severe that despite a purchase of 6 acres of land adjacent to our lot, our business has put expansion plans on hold. Our desire is to continue operating in our corner of Minnesota, but our current workforce shortages are unsustainable. Another supply chain challenge currently impacting our business is the cost of transportation for goods and supplies. In August of 2020, the cost to ship a standard 40-foot shipping container was approximately $4,300. By August of 2021, that figure had exploded to $30,000. Like our shortage of workers, this situation is also unsustainable from a business management standpoint. We need to see action to alleviate the bottlenecks, mostly caused by labor shortages. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, there are 100 million Americans not in the U.S. labor force. 42%, 42 million of that number are retirees. The Fed classifies the U.S. labor force as every U.S. citizen 16 or over who is not incarcerated, in the U.S. military, or in a nursing or residential care home. Retirees are considered part of the labor force. How can we incentivize retirees and others currently not working but able to work to enter the workforce to help fill the 10.4 million job openings America currently has? Bolstering participation is critical for U.S. competitiveness and economic strength. Lastly, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention a longstanding challenge to businesses like mine, not just in the chocolate and confectionery industry, but the broader food and beverage manufacturing sector as well. I'm referring to the U.S. sugar program, which consists of a combination of domestic marketing allotments, tariff rate quotas, guaranteed price support loans, and the feedstock flexibility program. This labyrinth of policy is so convoluted, I do not have the time nor the expertise to walk you through it all. The result is that the federal government restricts the supply of sugar to inflate prices. American businesses that rely on a steady supply of sugar are thus often forced to pay twice what our global competitors pay on the global market. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify today. I am grateful for the subcommittee's interest in my business, and I appreciate you looking at the troubling set of urgent supply chain challenges we're currently faced with. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Lantinen. And with that, I recognize Mr. Falk for 5 minutes.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Supply chain disruptions have affected the home building industry profoundly. From record high lumber prices to severe shortages of other building materials, the result has been lengthy delays or postponed projects and dramatic price increases. This is further harming housing affordability at a time when we face an ongoing housing affordability crisis. Coordinating the timely delivery of materials and products to the build site is challenging under the best of circumstances. The COVID-19 pandemic has roiled global supply chains, making them once challenging endeavor nearly impossible. In May of this year, a widely regarded framing lumber index hit a previously unthinkable all-time high of $1,500 per thousand board feet. NEHB estimated at the time the dramatic rise in lumber prices was adding nearly $36,000 to the price of the average new single-family home and nearly $13,000 to the price of each new multifamily home. And while lumber prices began a sharp decline soon after, prices began rising again in September and have increased by more than 40% over the past 6 weeks. Lumber pricing and availability is just one of the many problems we face with the supply chain. Supply chain challenges are driving scarcity and elevated prices on almost every product or good or material that goes into the construction of the American homes. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the average price of goods used as inputs to residential construction has risen 13.2% thus far in 2021, more than triple the rate of the core inflation over the same period. While historically high prices and supply shortages remain a challenge for all home building firms, they pose unique challenges for smaller firms. Among the unique challenges small firms face in these times are volatility and uncertainty, as well as the ability, or more often the inability, to pass along these ever-increasing prices. Without large economies of scale, small businesses generally cannot negotiate bulk discounts. Builders have often been forced to commit to purchasing materials such as lumber without knowing exactly what the cost will be when delivered. The effects of the uncertainty trickle all the way to the buyer, many of whom have balked at projects at the last minute due to unexpected price increases. At the core of today's building material supply chain issues are two fundamental problems: barriers to trade and challenges associated with moving goods to their final destination. I applaud the Biden administration for its action to date on the home building supply chain. Convening the Home Building Supply Chain Summit in July was critical to identifying some of the issues facing home builders. Prioritizing building materials and supplies as part of the Department of Transportation's Hours of Service waiver for trucking has been helpful, but it is only a start. More can be done and should be done. Congress and the administration need to consider steps to reduce or remove barriers to trade. This includes at least temporarily suspending duties and quotas on a wide array of imported building materials and goods, from Canadian softwood lumber to steel and aluminum. In addition, Congress and the administration must continue to aggressively explore solutions to port congestion and the persistent delays in truck and rail transportation. Building materials supply chain challenges exposed and exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic are driving an unsustainable increase in the cost to construct a new home. Until we address all the underlying causes of the crisis, millions of households are denied the American dream of home ownership, and millions more are rent burdened. Housing has been a bright spot for the U.S. economy as the nation continues to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. But historically, high lumber and building material prices continue to serve as headwinds for the U.S. housing sector. And there is mounting evidence that housing is at risk, has seen a dramatic increase in the cost of materials. One sign that the market may be slowing down is the number of housing units permitted but not started. It has risen over 40% in the past year. Any slowdown in housing production would be troublesome as we remain well off the mark of making up the shortages from underbuilding over the past decade. I commend Chairman Phillips and Ranking Member Van Dyne for holding this important hearing today, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have for me. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, and thank you to all our witnesses for being with us today. There are current and former small business owners on both sides of the aisle on this committee, and rest assured, we share your pain, we empathize, and I hope I speak for all when I say our obligation and intention is to identify solutions today. With that, I'll begin by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. We pointed out the problem. I don't think we need to keep identifying what's wrong. Mr. O'Brien, I'm going to start with you. You identified 4 areas that are causing the supply chain issues: surging demand, a trucker shortage, the China tariffs and a trade war, COVID-related shutdowns are the 4 that I believe you referenced. My intuition tells me that today you might hear from certain members of this committee that Joe Biden is responsible for this whole problem. The Biden administration's policies have led to inflation and supply chain issues and labor shortages and the like. You might even hear some say it was the former administration. The fact of the matter is, I don't care who's responsible, I want to find solutions. So with that, Mr. O'Brien, can you point to a policy of either the past Trump administration or the current Biden administration that you believe is responsible for the issue that we're now facing relative to supply chains? And if so, how do we fix it?
I can't point to any specific policy. Thank you for the question, Representative Phillips, but I would say that this is a long-term sustained problem. The current demand, the other thing I would describe is that this has been an unprecedented inversion of supply and demand. This is a very unnatural event when you talk about the world's supply chain. The world's economy simply wasn't built to shut down and restart and then deal with increased demand. A whole new product set that really occupied the global shipping lanes for the first several months was PPE. Yep. But I will say that this demand has exposed long-term choke points in the supply chain. And today it started with manufacturing, and it had to restart, but it has exposed other physical and infrastructure challenges throughout the supply chain, from our ports to available chassis to the draymen that haul containers out of a port. I mentioned in my testimony the one longest term. So every 4 or 5 years, we've seen a port slow down when demand is high. We've never seen anything like this. But really, in every period of increased demand, we've dealt with truck driver shortage. So if there's one area that I would want the committee to focus on the most, it is the part of the supply chain crunch that has been the most enduring and problematic. The additional benefit is that it will benefit both the international supply chain and the domestic supply chain. Many small businesses rely on North American trucks. Our job is to consolidate that small carrier group and bring access to them to small shippers. So like I testified, I would say anything that we can do, like the Drive Safe Act and the Women in Trucking Workforce Act, to increase supply. It's no secret that truck driving is a business that is not attracting adequate labor. And anything we can do to help the lifestyle and improve the attractiveness of that role is important. And I think anything else to address the other supply chains, I would just say it's been a long-term challenge, and today's crunch has just magnified it and brought it to all of our attention. But over the long haul, disruptions like this are unusual, and the international, the global, and the domestic supply chains have been resilient, but probably the weakest link is North American trucking due to the driver shortage that we've had for years.
And Mr. O'Brien, is it also fair to say that our infrastructure is not as sound and robust as some of our international peers relative to ports, and also a lack of an integrated communication system between ports and customs and the like? Is that an area in which we can improve?
That is an area that we can improve. Compared to other world-class ports, ours are backed up more right now, and we have less automation and less adequate communication programs at our ports. So I would agree that there's an opportunity to invest there as well.
And would you say that I think it's $17 or $18 billion in the bipartisan infrastructure bill dedicated to port improvement, would that help?
I think anything that we can do to improve infrastructure, especially transportation infrastructure, is helpful. Not just at the ports, but across our highways, our intermodal systems, our rail terminals, anything that can reduce those endpoint supply chain choke points that we have today.
Okay. Well, hopefully we'll be voting on that soon in the affirmative. With that, my time is expiring, so I will turn to my friend and ranking member, Ms. Van Dyne, for 5 minutes.
Excellent. Thank you. And it's good to see so many of you that we visited with when I was up in Minnesota last month. I want to ask Mr. Falk, I understand that you referenced the limitation of pricing flexibility for small businesses. President Biden's recent announcement mentioned that commitments from large companies like UPS and FedEx, Walmart, and Target to use expanded hours to move goods. But can you walk us through, from the ports to the trucking company to the supply house to the builder, how small businesses continue to be harmed and left out in times of supply chain shortages?
Well, the biggest challenge we have with the supply chain is the production of goods. And then once the goods are produced, having them tracked or delivered to the sites has become a bigger challenge. Inventories are low for materials. But having UPS and FedEx ramp up their delivery process doesn't do a lot for the challenges that we have with lumber, labor, and things of this nature that are handicapping our industry and creating a shortage of new houses, which has put a stress on existing housing stock, and therefore the possibility of affordable housing has left the scene.
I was going to ask you, I know that you did a great job in your testimony talking about the impacts actually on home buyers. Do you want to just run down very quickly how the supply chain shortages within the home builders industry is directly affecting consumers?
Well, it affects every price level in housing in some fashion. Affordability is the biggest thing that we're affected by. Housing affordability is always a challenge. But with not able, in my business, if people come to me to have a home built, they want to have an idea what the house is going to cost. And over the past, I've been doing this a long time, and every year in January we get a letter from suppliers that there's increases. For the last 12 months, we get letters about increases not every 30 days, but every week. So to be able to identify the cost of a house is almost impossible. So therefore, the entry-level home buyer is being pushed out of the market. The $36,000 that lumber added to the price of a home, if you do the math, for every $1,000 increase in price of a home, 150,000 people are pushed out of the market. They can no longer afford the American dream. So if you do the math, the $36,000, the impact for lumber alone. But the challenges we have as builders, to better answer your question, trying to schedule material has become virtually impossible. I ordered windows last year in November. The windows were delivered to the job site in June. And in the sequence of construction, you cannot produce the home and construct the home without having the windows installed. And so that's just one of the simple things. The ability to get appliances, the ability to just get cabinets. And if you can't get the cabinets, you can't put the countertops on. So therefore, these things have been slowed up. And anybody and everybody that works in this industry is in dire need of added labor. We've got to do something about the labor situation that will help us with the supply chain. If this supply chain disruption continues and prices continue, inflation's going to hit us. Therefore, Chairman Powell is going to raise interest rates, and our entire economy is going to come to a screeching halt if something isn't done quickly to get people back to work.
I appreciate that answer, and you definitely answered my question. My first question had to do with how this is affecting small businesses. We know some of the larger businesses, larger companies, multinational companies, are being able to work around some of these issues directly because they've got the capability. How are you seeing this affect small businesses the most? Because they don't have those capabilities.
Well, the large companies buy in bulk, and they design and build in bulk. Small firms, small building firms, and just for instance, the National Association of Home Builders is built up of, we have 30,000 builder members. And these builder members build about 80% of the houses built in this country. We alone, when the pandemic hit, we alone carried the nation's economy on our back with our industry. But with small firms that build 80% of the houses are handicapped in production, the ability to buy in bulk, or even the ability to forecast when materials can be delivered, makes it virtually impossible to run a business, much less tell a buyer what the price of a home is going to be. The large builders can buy in bulk and move materials around where needed, where we don't have those opportunities as small businesses. So in Tampa, it's a little different because the large volume builders build about 70% of the houses in Tampa Bay. And that's not, similar to in other parts of the country and other regions of the country. But
My time is up.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I apologize. I thank you for answering. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back, and now I recognize the gentlelady from California, Ms. Chu, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. O'Brien, as a representative from the Los Angeles area, which is home to the LA and Long Beach ports, which together process 40% of all shipping imports into the U.S., I have countless constituents whose businesses are impacted by day-to-day conditions at the port. I understand that many of the shipping delays are attributable to supply and demand issues, but it's undeniable that some of these disruptions are due to anti-competitive and unfair practices by shipping companies. For instance, at the Port of Los Angeles and Long Beach, we've seen many shipping containers refuse to load exports from the U.S. because they will make more money sending empty containers back to foreign ports with the highest demand. Some will not even allow containers to be sent inland to collect agricultural products because they would rather immediately load those containers back onto ships. The Federal Maritime Commission is responsible for protecting American exporters and importers from anti-competitive activities, but they lack the authority to take concrete action. That's why I have co-sponsored H.R. 4966, the Ocean Shipping Reform Act of 2021, which will give FMC the authority to enforce import and export logistics and implement minimum safety standards, as well as prohibit ocean carriers from unreasonably declining opportunities for U.S. exports. So can you talk about how anti-competitive behavior in the shipping industry has contributed to the current supply chain disruptions and discuss whether the federal government can step up its enforcement? Do these types of anti-competitive behaviors result in greater hardships for small businesses than larger ones?
Thank you, Representative. I'll start with the basics on the export economy, in that containers have always gone back empty to source of origin. And the greatest problem there, and what drives that, is a lack of balanced trade that the United States has. So since containerization, steamships have not made the choice to turn back empty containers, but they brought them back. And I think some of the demand for returning those containers empty today is driven by our own demand for these urgent imports that we have today. I'm not aware from any of our customer situations where they've seen illegal activity or had containers refuse to get loaded. I do think if that is going on, we are curious and looking forward to hearing more about the Ocean Shipping Reform Act. And if there is the possibility in that, to empower, if things like that are happening, I do believe that them having the power to investigate that is a good thing. But from the beginning of international trade, it is our trade balance that has, for rational reasons, sent containers back to Asian manufacturing centers empty.
Well, I certainly do hope we have ocean reform, because we do have American exporters frustrated with being with higher freight rates for shipping companies and increased tensions between shippers and ocean carriers over fees and the availability of containers. Nonetheless, let me talk about another issue, which is the fact that there are changing consumer trends that are increasing the demand. In fact, U.S. retail sales increased by 8% between 2019 and 2020, and another 14% between 2020 and 2021. So Americans have shifted much of their consumption away from services and towards goods, the majority of which are imported. So the demand that we're seeing at ports like Los Angeles and Long Beach might be a long-term trend that's here to stay. So it's important that we focus beyond the ports at ways improving capacity along the entire supply chain. I first want to thank President Biden for taking action in Southern California to move our ports to 24/7 operation so that we can clear the backlog. But he can't solve the problem by himself. For example, 60% of the goods coming through the ports transit through my district in the San Gabriel Valley via train and truck. We need containers to be emptied and restocked at the ports, but we also need better, cleaner ways to quickly move these goods to warehouses and businesses. And in fact, there was a survey from the National Retail Federation which had 22% of the members said that they were experiencing intermodal rail rail delays, and that 3 weeks had been added to their supply chains. Anyway, both the Senate Infrastructure Bill and the Build Back Better Act will help transform our ports to meet these new consumer patterns. But could you talk about other measures that Congress should be thinking about to increase our capacity to move and process these goods domestically?
Ms. Chu, unfortunately, your time has expired. With that, I yield to Mr. Hagedorn, the ranking member on the subcommittee on underserved agricultural and rural business development. Mr. Hagedorn, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate that. Ranking Member Van Dyne, good to be with you. Thanks to the witnesses. I mean, I appreciate this hearing. It's a good topic, very important, timely. But I would just encourage my friends on the other side of the aisle that if you want to stop the bleeding in this whole supply chain issue and inflation, let's quit micromanaging the economy. Let's quit dumping cash into the economy at a time when businesses aren't ready to respond and spurring more inflation, shortages of products, services, labor, you name it. I don't think this bill that's coming along, $3.5 trillion, whatever it is, with all sorts of taxes, regulations, higher cost energy. I mean, I don't know a small business out there that says higher cost energy is going to do the trick. And then, more government spending without any work requirements or technical training requirements for people on welfare. Those things have all been stripped out. I tried to put that back in the Ag Committee, voted down. I don't think that's the way to go. And by the way, though, Mr. Falk, I appreciate you being here. The home builders have supported a piece of legislation that I've introduced to help people get technical training, certificate programs, and things like that. Our bill would allow people that have saved for 529 education savings accounts to not just use those monies for their kids to go to a four-year college, but to also go to vocational school and things like that. I know you need a lot of those types of skilled workers. That's still something you support, and you think it would be a step in the right direction?
Yeah, sir, turn on your microphone if you would. Thank you.
We're working very hard to train individuals in our industry. We're an aging industry. For every 5 people we lose, whether it's retirement or for whatever reason, we're only able to replace them with 2 right now. Mm-hmm. And any type of legislation that will help us with training is very, very important.
Thank you. Ms. Lantonen, I note for the record that your headquarters, I guess your manufacturing facility is in La Center, where you grew up. It's in our district in southern Minnesota. And I've toured it many times. Very impressive. You've been expanding there. And your success is quite something. I think you started your business when you bought it with about $100,000 in sales, and now you're up to about $45 million. That's quite an increase. So congratulations on that. What do you think about the workforce shortages? Do you have any ideas that maybe we could address here at this committee or across the nation as to how we can help?
Hi, Jim. First and foremost, hope your health as well, as always. I think the most important thing we can do right now is dive into the 100 million Americans currently not in the workforce. If 42% of them are retirees, how do we target that group, which is a huge portion of potential workforce we could tap into? Provide them with incentives. Can they work tax-free up to a certain dollar amount? Are there further Social Security benefits we could give them for coming back to work? I feel like we need a Rosie the Riveter character focused at retirees that says, "We need you," as the tagline. And we really need to focus on these potential groups that could be contributing to our society, because we will fall behind if we don't have the employees to run our businesses.
Many of the businesses I speak with in southern Minnesota tell me that they just sometimes can't compete with the federal government. There's so much money out there flowing from the federal government. It was enhanced unemployment compensation. Now it's in a number of different areas, and I think that's still an issue. I go back to work and technical training requirements for welfare. It works every time that we implement it. We've gotten away from that. Some people say that it's tough for folks to get back in the workforce because they lose benefits, and there's some short-term loss because there's so much out there. So I'm a proponent of transition wages, whatever we have to do in order to give people the incentive to get back to work. It's much more compassionate than having people dependent on government. The compassionate is letting folks, giving them the incentive in order to go out there and care for themselves and to be in the workforce contributing. So that's something that I'll continue to do. Mr. Folk, any other comments that you have? I appreciate your what you said about supply chain issues and trade. Maybe that's I understand we had a deal with China and other countries. We're trying to sort that out, but maybe in this short period of time, we need to do some things to alleviate that. But I got 20 seconds.
We just have to get people back to work. We have an arm of our association, the Home Builders Institute. We're training military veterans that are exiting the military back into public life. We're trying to train incarcerated people. We're trying to get training back into the schools where it should be, so younger people can learn trades that not only will teach them how to work in the home building industry, but it will help them with their lives long range.
Thank you. I'm out of time. Again, I appreciate your support for our bill.
Thank you, sir.
And now I recognize my colleague from Minnesota, Representative Craig, for 5 minutes.
Well, good morning. The Small Business Committee is well represented by Minnesota, certainly each and every day. Thank you so much, Chairman Phillips, for yielding. And thank you to all of our witnesses today. A special thank you and welcome to Mr. O'Brien and Ms. Lantanen. It's always nice to hear from fellow Minnesotans here on the committee. I'm really grateful that our subcommittee is holding this important hearing today. Every single week, I hear from different businesses in Minnesota's 2nd Congressional District whose bottom lines are being impacted by disruptions to our global supply chains. But supply chain shortages aren't only impacting businesses. I've also heard from schools in my district who struggle to offer balanced lunches because of shipping delays, and of course from customers who are facing higher costs on household items. A strong and resilient supply chain is absolutely vital to keeping our economy moving, which is exactly why I co-founded the Bipartisan Supply Chain Caucus last Congress, and this was before the pandemic. In the months to come, I do hope that this bipartisan group can come together and identify common sense solutions to help resolve these ongoing challenges and deliver relief to the American people. Many of these supply chains, Mr. O'Brien, as you certainly know, are really run by the private sector. There's certainly a number of contributing factors involved. It's not simple, although it's real easy just to kind of throw a political barb back and forth and blame one party or the other or one administration or another. We know that these supply chain issues are very, very complicated, and it's going to take more than a slogan or a political barb in order to solve them. So we've certainly, Mr. O'Brien, seen the cost of moving products into rural America and, of course, the Midwest especially on the rise. You mentioned in your testimony one issue you're seeing is a shortage of truck drivers. I'm really proud to represent Dakota County Technical College, which offers a Class B CDL truck and bus driver training program. How could programs like this help bolster our supply chain? So, Mr. O'Brien, you first.
Well, thank you, Representative. I think anything that we can do to get more drivers into the workforce is beneficial. Training is an area of current demand. A lot of the training programs and truck driver certifications, you need to get a commercial driver's license. A lot of those programs shut down during COVID, and that led to a delay. And I think anything that involves outreach, like I said, it's no secret that it's a challenging job. You're away from home. You have other choices. Today, you can't become a commercial driver for trucking until age 21. That keeps many potential drivers out of the workforce where they find an alternative trade that doesn't keep you on the road for most of the time and away from family. So not only do we support both cooperation between the private sector and public on solving these problems, we particularly see the need for additional programs for driver recruitment and training.
Thank you so much. I'd love to turn now to Ms. Lantonen. First of all, thank you so much for your service to our country in the U.S. Army and for taking time to appear before us today, especially with Halloween so close and the holidays quickly approaching. I'm sure that Maud Borup is hard at work preparing for a busy time this time of year. How have you seen supply chain challenges in the food supply industry? And of course, what do you think Congress can do to help either do or get out of the way and not do?
Thank you, Congresswoman Craig. We are starting to see everything go up. The cost of plastic containers, the cost of food. I truly believe a year from now, everything we buy will be 35 to 40% higher. It's going to take longer for it to catch up at the register. I would say, as I've spoken with people in the industry, a large part of it's driven by shortages of workers. So we're all struggling to either quickly automate to keep up with increased demand or do whatever we can do to find people. The shortage of people isn't just in the US, it's actually a worldwide struggle right now happening. So I feel like the US has a really unique opportunity for advancement right now as everyone is struggling on a global level. What are we doing to tap into our workforce that is here and trying to find those pockets of people and how we can get them out and working and contributing to society is really key right now.
Thank you so much, Ms. Lantonen. And unfortunately, I'm out of time. So, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
The gentle lady yields back. And now I recognize Mr. Muser from Pennsylvania, the ranking member on the Subcommittee on Economic Growth, Tax, and Capital Access. Mr. Muser, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Phillips, very much. And thank you to the Republican leader, Van Dyne, for holding this hearing. And thanks to all of you for being here with us. We appreciate you taking the time away from your business and your homes. Small businesses are not happy throughout my district and throughout Pennsylvania and wherever else I speak to businesses. As I was in business for many years, friends that are owning small businesses nationwide. Workforce issues as are being described here. Costs are going up randomly, very, very difficult situation. Container costs, as we're talking about, have gone up from $3,000 less than a year ago to $27,000, $28,000 with no reliability in delivery. Demand is up, supply is low, particularly products made in the U.S. So you, on top of all of that, the supply side of your business, your industry, you've got upset customers, you've got cash flow problems because you're trying to buy things. If you get a prepaid discount, you're sending those checks into making those payments to try to expedite your deliveries. All your scheduling has got to be random. All of your scheduled services and installations and anything related to building is all over the chart. You probably have people showing up to do the job, but the parts and everything else aren't there. So everybody's pulling their hair out. I mean, businesses are breathless, as I put it, because every time I get them on the phone, they sound breathless, and we're in the Small Business Committee. We got to do what we can here to correct things. Now, of course, we have the port. And part of that was due to COVID. A lot of it was due to mismanagement. A lot of it was due to government disruption. And that's where perhaps we can come in. And yet, as a Christmas present, the Democrat side of our Congress wants to tax you more and have some unclear vaccine requirements, which I'm all for the vaccine, but the guidelines, as you all well know, are not clarified at this point. So people don't know if they're going to be laying people off come November 8th or not. No matter how many times I ask the administration for those guidelines, we don't get them. So let's get to some questions from the real world, which is where you all work and live. So offer me, Mr. Falk, sorry, the workforce availability. What do you see? You brought up a couple of ideas that were well thought out. Related to workforce, what can federal, state government do to improve the workforce climate?
Well, if you pay a man to not work, why would he work? The headwinds that we see in the near future for the home building industry is lack of labor. So it's simple. We need to get people back using their hands, showing up to work, helping us produce materials, helping us get jobs done in the field. And if we have to incentivize people to get them to work, whatever we've got to do, this supply chain issue is not going to resolve itself. It's going to take some effort to get people back out to work.
You think there's more government necessary for more stimulus dollars and more regulations and other government involvement, or perhaps should government back off and allow the open free markets to work?
Well, there's certainly always needs for the government to help people. But in this case, I think anything that continues to happen in the manner it's been happening is going to just simply delay things and pull the handbrake on our economy.
So what about the Safe Truck Act? That's a specific bill. I'll open that up to anyone. Maybe Ms. Christine Lantinen, you deal with quite a few imports and trucking issues. The Safe Truck Act would add to our trucking workforce shortages, allowing those between the ages of 18 and 21 to drive on an interstate basis. That's just one legislation that really isn't moving here in the House. It's got a lot of co-sponsors on both sides. That would be something I would think would help make a difference. Are you folks familiar with that?
Mr. Muser, I'm sorry, time has expired.
Oh,
We might have time to come back to a second round, in which case we'll get back to you, I promise. Now I recognize the gentleman from Maryland, our vice chair of the committee and chairman of the subcommittee on contracting and infrastructure, Mr. Mfume, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My thanks to you and to the ranking member for holding this hearing. I want to also add my appreciation and thanks to the witnesses for being with us today. Mr. Chairman, I heard something earlier that I want to actually start with and hopefully end with, because it's exactly what I think the biggest issue is, and the one that we've got to figure out how to get our hands around. And that is the inversion of the supply-demand model, which we all grew up with, which we learned about in our first economics class, and which is the way we run our households and run our lives. I can't ever remember a time in history when that's been inverted, where one side dictates to the other in a way that has never happened before. So that inversion, to me, I believe, is the one thing that we've got to come to grips with and figure out how we reverse it. Now, there are a lot of people who hadn't been paying attention to supply-demand issues because they've got other things, quite frankly, that they're dealing with. But when many looked up and saw 100 ships and containers off the coast of California because they couldn't get unloaded, it started people asking why. Here in Baltimore, our ports are backed up also, not to the same extent, but it's the same issue. It affects all of us. And I think in listening to some of the discussions today and some of the questions, probably we do ourselves a service by getting away from stereotypes and trying to find a way to get to solutions. I heard one of my colleagues on the other side talk about the way to fix this is to put work requirements on people who are receiving welfare. Or people who are receiving welfare were receiving welfare before the pandemic. Most of them don't want to be on welfare. Most are white and female, and they are taking care of families as best they can. So this quick fix notion of let's put some work requirements on these people, I think gets us past where we ought to be. It doesn't give us a solution, it gives us a slogan. And if we talk about, as I've heard some of the witnesses say, they're recognizing the fact that ultimately they will continue to have to pass along prices to consumers. I understand their pain in that regard because it doesn't help them. It reduces the amount of business that they're able to do. It doesn't increase it. And right now, we've heard this morning from some of the leading economists in the nation that the average family has a cost of $175 more to be able to take care of goods and services in their household than they did last year. Those same economists are saying that we will be in this inflationary trend at least through the first quarter of next year. And if that's the case, it cries out for immediate kind of actions. I want to commend Representative Chu for her legislation in this regard. I think it takes us a long, long way, and I'm hoping that we can pass that soon. And this issue of a lack of workers is important. I'm listening to the discussion about truck drivers in particular, and I could not agree more that we don't have enough and that we've got to find a way to make that particular occupation more desirable for the people who are in it and the people who are looking at trying to get in it. And some of the things that we have to do in that regard, as someone said earlier, is to look at wages and to look at the taxation that we put on those persons. Well, every one of those things has an economic consequence. So unless we're prepared to go head first into this, recognizing that we have to, in some instances, spend money in the area of truckers and truck driving in order to rehabilitate and to recreate a occupation that people want to go into, we're going to be fighting this one for a long, long time. We've got to be proactive. And sometimes proactive means, in fact, investing. Now, the issue of incentivizing workers, I'd like to go to that. I think it was, I don't remember who. I think Ms. Laniton who brought it up, is something that has some immediacy to it. And when you talk about incentivizing and retirees, it's got to be to the extent where those retirees, in my opinion, feel like it's in their best interest. So that's something I think that's very valuable. I think it's a great solution. It requires expediency. We've got to move on it because this situation continues to languish. But even beyond this situation, I've always been an advocate of incentivizing retirees to help in whatever particular industry or area of expertise they have come out of. And I hope that we don't lose that as we talk about trying to find a way to get to a solution. I know the notion of suspending duties and taxes is important, and I can support that. I think that helps us to find a way, again, to lower the cost on the respective industries. But at the end of the day, we're still grappling with this inversion of a supply-demand model that I don't think we've ever seen before in this nation, in a capitalistic society. And unless we come to grips with that.
Mr. Mfume, your time has expired, unfortunately, and we're going to try to do a second round, so if you can stick with us.
Well, I will try, Mr. Chair, but I just would leave all of you with that thought about this model and how we fix it.
Thank you, sir. And with that, I recognize Mr. Donalds from Florida for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the witnesses, thanks for coming. Obviously, supply chain issues is really the core issue, one of the core issues affecting our economy in such a disastrous way. Chuck, it's good seeing you. And it's been, we've seen Chuck Falcon and I know each other back from Florida. For those who don't know, he actually did a lot of work with my mother-in-law for many, many years. So I'll make sure I tell Gayla that, that you said hello and you were here testifying today. I've heard a lot of different things in this hearing already, so I'm going to try to cut through some of the things I think are important and just ignore some of the things that are not. I think it's crystal clear we have a staffing problem, an employee problem in the United States. My last read on labor participation rate was somewhere between 60 and 61% of Americans are actually working Americans are in a labor force. Our economy needs a labor participation rate of around 65% to be kind of humming along. We simply are not there. I pretty much would assume every witness we have could attest to that fact that we have a severe labor shortage issue. I do remember back in February when President Biden pushed the American Rescue Plan, one of the key provisions of extending federal unemployment benefits through September that he wanted to do. The minority party said, do not do that, because our economy is ready to start humming along. And if you essentially pay people extended federal unemployment benefits, you will see a labor shortage. That is what has happened in the United States. But specifically to supply chain, there was actually a really good article. It was on zerohedge.com. And the title of the article was essentially, I'll pull it up right now, Empty Christmas Stockings, Don't Blame COVID, Blame California. And one of the things it talked about was that California has actually put through two very interesting pieces of legislation that have crippled the trucking industry in California specifically. One is AB 5, which was targeted at gig workers and to protect gig workers by making them employees. But what's actually happened is that in California, the ports were actually accessed by owner-operator truckers. But the owner-operator truckers are essentially in that gig classification. So they can't access the ports in California anymore. So now you have to go essentially with union truckers, also dealing with the union issues we have with the longshoremen as it exists right now. So no matter what business you're in, one of the reasons you're having issues accessing a lot of product is because there are less trucks actually accessing the ports in California. The second California issue was they passed emission laws that they struck a deal with the EPA on, where if your truck has an engine that is more than 10 years old, that truck is not allowed to be licensed and to be registered in the state of California, which means that truck cannot access and be driven on the roads in California, which means now you have supply companies who are taking the newer trucks to the ports, driving the newer trucks just to the state lines of California, and then offloading the freight from the new trucks to the old trucks and driving the old trucks through the United States. I'd ask the witnesses, and anybody can jump in, Mr. O'Brien, Mr. Falk, anybody, does this make sense in terms of how you would maintain the logistics of a supply chain as sensitive and as robust as ours in the United States?
Congressman Donald, thank you, and thank you for acknowledging our longtime friendship. I think any legislation that disrupts the opportunity to transport materials right now is bad legislation. If they can divert those tankers over to Florida, maybe we can help them there, unload their cargo and move it. But anything that disrupts the flow and the transportation of materials right now is very disruptive to this issue. And the home building industry, we've had our eye on the supply chain issues for almost over a year now. Just remind you of that.
Mr. O'Brien, if you're still with us, I mean, if you care to comment, I would like to hear your opinion, because you actually bring a lot of valid points to this discussion. I really would be interested in your opinion.
Thank you, Representative Donalds. I would just say that outside, the current congestion really goes beyond any port or any state. It is system-wide. It involves many different choke points, not just from the ports, but from the supply of real estate that's available to transload, from rail yards to trucking. On the issue of AB 5, we talked to our carriers. They are concerned about it. We don't have, it's not a particular issue for us. It doesn't apply to our model as a value-added intermediary. But overall, I would just encourage the committee to think about the supply chain as systematic, and that it goes all the way from the domestic links to the international links, and from port all the way to delivery. And there's a lot of different modes versus any one port or state that we need to work on.
All right, I'm over time. Thank you so much, gentlemen. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back, and now I recognize the chairwoman of the Subcommittee on Economic Growth, Tax, and Capital Access, the gentlelady from Kansas, Ms. Davids, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, first of all, I'm glad that we're holding this hearing today on such a critical issue that's definitely impacting small businesses and their customers in real time. You know, supply chain delays and shortages have been a concern since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, when our stockpile of critically needed medical supplies and PPE was depleted and demand was growing to protect frontline healthcare workers. And, you know, amid those early shortages, I heard from businesses in Kansas about the impacts of the supply chain breakdown on various industries. You know, their concerns led me to introduce the Supplies Act in April of last year to support small business, to support small manufacturers that really stepped up to produce some of those desperately needed medical supplies and equipment. And today, our small businesses are still faced with these extremely high shipping costs and delays that are setting them back. And frankly, we heard this earlier too, this has been an issue since even before the pandemic. And it demonstrates that we've been dependent on a pretty precarious supply chain for far too long. And, in today's hearing, I do want to focus on the challenges that shipping and freight industries are facing right now. The Kansas Third is an extremely busy intermodal shipping hub. Our small businesses and the small businesses across the country rely on the Kansas City metro area to facilitate the transportation of so many different products to their destinations. And as the vice chair of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, I've been working to alleviate congestion at ports of trade, and the issue of shipping container shortages. And I'm glad that we have a freight expert here to help us understand the impact on small businesses and how we can support them through these shipping challenges, especially after they've suffered such devastating impacts during the pandemic. So, Mr. O'Brien, I'm really glad that you are able to join us today. And as a freight company that really focuses on small business services, can you kind of speak to the unique challenges that small businesses are facing with the current state of shipping?
Yes, thank you, Representative Davids. So we work with companies of all sizes, and consistent with my testimony, I would say that companies of all sizes are struggling. It is especially challenging for small businesses. But we are getting calls every day from potentially the largest companies in the world that are struggling, and sometimes they are thousands of containers behind. So like I said, it is not one port, it is not one state or one point of origin. It's just this very unique and unprecedented in my 30-year career crunch from a supply chain standpoint, from a demand and supply inversion. So we're in the footsteps of the small shippers, sometimes quite literally on site. We represent them. We represent them with the steamships. We do everything that we can. As you know, in Kansas City, we have our Freight Quote by Robinson team, and they build online tools that were built with and for small shippers to give them access to LTL pricing at the rates and size and scale of a larger shipper. So we focus on anything that we can do. And right now within this period, our people are working harder than ever on behalf of customers of all sizes. Mm-hmm. We're in their footsteps as one of the largest purchasers of transportation services around the world. So it certainly has been extremely challenging, but we're doing everything that we can for companies of all sizes today.
Yeah. And so, mentioning the working with LTL, and I think of us being able to move quickly and be able to pivot, be able to really be agile. And I think we need good infrastructure to be able to do that. As we work on this bipartisan infrastructure package, I'm curious if you can, from your perspective, what investments can we be making in infrastructure that are going to result in that timely and efficient and effective moving of all of those goods?
I think anything that helps move the flow of goods. So expediting at our ports, the American Transportation Research Institute is a good place to start. They publish a list of the largest supply chain choke points, and those are highways, not ports. Those are most of our major metro areas. We have a challenge with available drivers, and congestion is not helping them at all. It's making the job more challenging. It's delaying revenue for them. So I would want the focus to be broad across the supply chain, because the challenge really is broad across every mode. There are choke points today.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. And thank you again for everybody participating today. And I yield back.
The gentle lady yields back, and now I recognize the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Fitzgerald, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to take it a little bit different direction than just on the supply side. Met with a number of developers, and this is in southeastern Wisconsin, about a month ago. And there seemed to be a level of frustration, and I know this is regional, but developers right now and the relationships that they're trying to build with municipalities, to further, for the most part, subdivisions and the creation of subdivisions. There seems to be another issue, and that is kind of everything that needs to happen to support that subdivision, whether it's the underground or later on kind of revisiting that site and making sure that it's up to snuff and up to code. Mr. Fogg, maybe you can comment on this. I mean, it's hard to get a municipality to make this type of upfront investment, not knowing necessarily if they're going to be able to recoup this at a later date. And certainly, I think what we're seeing is not only the disruptions, but also just the labor issue and being able to have enough carpenters or masons on the job site. I mean, this is becoming far more complicated than it's ever been before. And I was wondering if you could comment on that upfront investment that municipalities have to make.
Well, unfortunately, a lot of municipalities today are against growth. And the challenges with these areas being against growth, it puts stress on the old housing stock for people to have a place to live. The other thing is the regulations that are heaped on our industry continue to increase. Right now, the effect of regulations on construction of a home today add 30% to the cost of the home. This is before the house ever starts. And this is an average number throughout the country. So unneeded regulations, delays in approvals, and then just certain areas that are against growth, and they have moratoriums on growth. And we need to do a better job of planning for water and sewer and the infrastructure that we need to provide housing for people because, again, our supply of new houses, a healthy supply of new houses typically is about 6 months. We have about a 2-month or less supply now. Old housing stock's the same way. The resale houses, typically a 6-month inventory is a healthy inventory. We're below 2 months now for that. So all this does is increases the price and just prohibits the opportunity for people to enjoy the American dream.
Yeah, Mr. Robinson, can you comment on kind of this dance that goes on between municipalities and developers and oftentimes, what results in zero new development? Mr. Robinson, could you comment on that? Oh, Mr. O'Brien, I'm sorry. Mr. O'Brien.
Sorry, I wasn't clear on the question. Could you repeat that?
Yeah, I was talking about when development is happening and municipalities are making the upfront investment in the underground and everything related to that project. Oftentimes, what they recoup on the back end is difficult for them at this point, so they're leery or they're unwilling to make that investment.
Yeah, that's not an area that our business is very close to. I would say one trend from a municipality standpoint that we need to be careful on is the trend towards banning urban parking. So I've mentioned the need for more truck drivers. The long-term trend is, more urban residents. That is one thing that impedes, and it's not talked about that much, but a lot of cities are removing urban trucking parking spots, and that makes it more difficult to attract drivers that would have to drive a longer distance to be able to get to their truck, and does not help the already existing capacity crunch.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, my comment would be in the developers in southeastern Wisconsin. I know it's regional, but a lot of the issues, I think, have resulted in zero growth in some of my counties. Literally municipalities that have not had one new home built over the last 3 years. And I think it's becoming not only alarming, but is a very complex issue. So with that, I would yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The gentleman yields back, and now I recognize the gentlelady from Georgia, Ms. Bordeaux, for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chairman Phillips and Ranking Member Van Dyne, for holding today's hearing and for allowing me to wave on to discuss this critical issue. Supply chain issues have become increasingly apparent since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, particularly in recent months, as our economy continues to recover and demand surges. In my district, Metcam metal fabricators had to temporarily shut down production of certain items due to a shortage of titanium dioxide, a component almost exclusively available from China. This disruption then led Carrier to having to restrict its manufacturing processes in its southeastern United States facility, And this shows how these shocks and disruptions in one portion of the supply chain can trickle down and affect many, many other components. These issues are not new, however. In recent years, as our economy has depended on just-in-time delivery models and increasingly global supply chains, we really haven't matched that change with sufficient government review and support for supply chains of critical goods and services. This effort requires a whole of government approach, one that really emphasizes collaboration between the government and the private sector to achieve our shared goal of a resilient economy that can avoid and withstand disruptions and shocks to the supply chain. Of course, this is not just an economic issue, it is also a national security issue and is about our national health, as we saw during the pandemic when we were very dependent on global supply chains that were badly disrupted. This is why I introduced the Supply Chain Health and Integrity for the Nation Act, the Supply Chain Act, with Representatives Kinzinger and Kelly 2 weeks ago. The Supply Chain Act would create an Office of Supply Chain Resiliency and Crisis Response at the Department of Commerce, which would be responsible for coordinating this approach and collaborating with the private sector and labor organizations. This office would also be responsible for producing a quadrennial national strategic plan for manufacturing and industrial innovation, which will guide our nation's efforts to secure critical supply chains. This question is for Mr. O'Brien and really ties back to that idea of this just-in-time production strategies. We saw those really developed over the past couple decades. They have helped keep inventories and costs low for businesses and customers, but clearly these economic and business strategies are also really vulnerable to disruptions. Can you talk a little about why this business model was adopted? And then if you think this model is going to change after the disruptions around COVID, what are going to be some of the changes you're seeing out there, or are we just trying to get back to business as usual?
Thank you, Representative Bordeaux. I'd like to start by addressing your comments about the public-private cooperation, and I think that's going to be key to a solution. I was a part of the Minnesota Business Partnership that worked with the state and city and the major employers in Minnesota at the initial outbreak of COVID, and we volunteered our time as well as many corporate leaders to facilitate the flow of PPE into the state of Minnesota, and then we passed on what we learned to other states. So I think that is the way forward. In terms of investment in the flow of goods, I would say as you look about that whole supply chain, keep in mind the customs processes. That's completely in government control. Anything we can do to modernize U.S. customs processing and automate it, which has been the direction that we've had some success, is great. Lastly, on your question of just-in-time inventory has been a long-term trend, which is to reduce cost and keep safety stocks as low as possible in order to pass on those savings to consumers. So it has been a good trend. It's obviously in an unprecedented time like this shown the weakness side of it in ways that we haven't noticed in the past and are probably unlikely to in the future. Obviously, companies right now are rethinking that strategy. I don't think right now there's enough available supply of transportation or goods to create anything like a bullwhip effect through this. But I do talk to several companies that are thinking about reevaluating. But I don't think it's, I don't think we're going to go back to a period of trying to build up safety stocks to the level that would be necessary to prevent the challenges with something to this scale, but I would see some adjustments. But overall, there's an expense to carrying costs to businesses and ultimately to the consumer.
Thank you. I think this is going to be an ongoing challenge of how we both support those supply chains. We want to make sure we're efficient, working in a very efficient way, but also how are we going to deal with disruptions? And I don't know that it's just going to be, things are going to be able to go back entirely to normal. I think there will be, other unforeseen things on the horizon. We need to be agile and able to really figure out how we adapt quickly to that. This next question is for, I think I'm out of time. So unfortunately, I will hold my next question, and thank you so much for letting me weigh in here, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back, and now I recognize my colleague from Minnesota, Mr. Stauber, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, Ranking Member Van Dyne, for holding this very important that we look at this issue and find ways to secure our supply chains. And I first want to say that when at the start of COVID, there was the nation wasn't sure what was going to happen. But I have to say the trucking industry and those related helped carry the goods to the American people, goods that we needed. And obviously right now with some of the policies coming out of this administration, bare shelves, energy policies, causing us all to pay more for not only gasoline and other fuels, but even groceries. I want to thank the witnesses, in particular from C.H. Robinson, Mr. O'Brien, and I know they are not only a national, but really a world leader. And to have an expert such as Mr. O'Brien here, I want to thank my colleague from Minnesota for bringing this expertise to this committee. It's really important. And I'm going to get right to the point. We know that we're paying more. Mr. O'Brien, you mentioned that small businesses are going to be hurt more. Just in fuel costs alone, can you tell us the devastation it's going to cause small businesses if they have to pay additional monies to find different ways or pay more to bring that commodity to their small business? Can you tell me what you've heard, how devastating it will be to small businesses that don't have the capital to pay those high prices right now?
Thank you, Representative. I would add that fuel is one of the things that goes into any shipper's budget of any size. Fuel, obviously being very high, certainly does not help. It's one of the input costs. Transportation rates, they both domestically, we've talked about transportation rates globally being up, enormously. Transportation rates are up domestically as well. In the spot market, we've seen rates, 40 to 50% increases over last year. Contractual rates are up.
Mr. O'Brien, rather, what would be the input rate right now for cost of fuel?
I'm sorry, could you clarify the question?
What's the input rate today for the cost of fuel?
Do you mean as a percentage of transportation?
Yes, percentage.
Roughly 40%.
Okay. With the increase of fuel prices, would it be more than 40? With the fuel going up, would that input increase?
I'm sorry, could you clarify the question? It really depends on the length of haul of the goods. So
if it's a 500-mile haul, for example, is the input cost for fuel going to be more?
I don't know exactly what the break point is, but if you think about it being 40%, you could just do the math from there. I would say that there's some break point, but it's pretty parallel to the cost of line haul. The longer you go, the more you're paying for fuel. So I would use 40% as the right metric, and then just multiply by the increasing rates of fuel. The system and the transportation has a pretty good way of dealing with fuel. It's a surcharge tied to an average diesel price. So the processing is there. The industry for years has dealt with it going up and down, but today it's an added expense in an already constrained industry.
What I'm hearing from the small businesses in Minnesota's 8th district, northeastern Minnesota, they can't get their supplies. They can't get what the consumer needs. And in light of the PPP that was extended to them, many of them are on the verge of not making it because they can't get the products to market. And I think that one of the things that we must look at and we must understand is that as the experts in the transportation industry, we're looking for you for answers and help as we go forward. And I think that what you've given out today in your testimony is extremely helpful, so we can make good decisions to help with this crisis. And it's not going to happen overnight, but we have to have good legislation that will move forward and allow and allow us to get back to where we were, to get the goods to the consumers, including the small businessmen and women across this nation. I see him over time, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much.
And with that, we're going to move to a second round of questioning. Anybody wants to participate in another round, I ask you to join me. With that, I'll start with myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Lowe, I remember years ago using the STEP program for our business to help with trade shows and market our brands overseas. We've talked about how we need to be a country that fills more of these empty containers and sends them overseas. And I really want to salute you and your enterprise for being amongst that 1% of small businesses in the U.S. that actually export their products internationally. Would love for you to share with this body how the STEP program has helped you and the elements that we should continue to invest in and support, and your overview of how we can be more effective.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips, for the question. Really appreciate that. Yeah, the STEP program has just been enormous for us in being able to use the services. We use the services in our marketing strategy to access new customers. That is one of the biggest things that this program has allowed us to do, is to do trade shows, be able to use trade offices located across the world, U.S. embassies that we use as well too, to hold meetings. And really locate with market research from the different universities that we have been teamed up with and partnered with, as well as using their offices for boots on the ground type of approach to be able to look for new customers of ours. When we find new customers of ours, that's when we send large containers overseas. And we continually build that relationship with those customers to then send more containers of equipment to them to service their local market with our product. That is done through different programs in the STEP program that includes different trade shows. We are able to use their trade offices to understand who their end customer is. So not only the potential manufacturers that we use, but also the end customers that would then use our product, that these trade offices help to build that business. It is a great partnership that we're able to do with those manufacturers to provide those services. We don't understand sometimes all the different factors involved with it, and that's where the MEDC comes into play to help us with those trade offices to understand what we need to do to go into market and to be very, very successful with that market. We use educational and training with the STEP program as well too. I wish I knew everything when it came to international trade. I don't, and I rely on them to provide that training for us to make that happen. The effectiveness of this program is really big for a small business like ourselves. We appreciate all those services that they provide to us because it helps us grow our business, and in doing so helps them out as well too. The effectiveness, I would say, to continue with the STEP program, to continue with the government services like Michigan Economic Development Committee that continually helps us and figures out different ways. We've used internship programs with them. We've used lots of different services that they continually offer us to make our success in international vital to our business.
Love it. I hope you keep filling more containers.
We will. Thank you.
With that, Ms. Lantonen, I'd like to return to you for a moment. You referenced job training, incentives as two potential solutions to rectify your 100-employee deficiency at the moment. I hope you might speak about other potential solutions. Is immigration reform perhaps one? Is child care provision, especially in Minnesota, where we're the third highest cost state in the country? Are those areas in which we should spend some time and look at improving policy?
Thank you, Congressman Phillips. Of that 100 million people that are not in the workforce, 10% is an estimate for illegal immigrants. And we've turned away many people with fake IDs to the point that our HR team has said if we accepted fake IDs, we'd have the 100 people that you need, Christine. So I do think we need to look at that and look at people that have been in our country and that have been contributing to our society. And as another potential work pool to pull from that's out there and wants to work. As far as childcare goes, we are actually looking at putting a childcare facility on site at our factory to help working moms and to help with the costs of childcare and the quality of childcare. So those are important things, definitely.
Thank you very much. My time has expired. Do any of my colleagues, Ms. Van Dyne? Anybody?
Chairman.
I recognize Mr. Hagedorn, my colleague from Minnesota, for 5 minutes.
Thank you for doing this. I'm going to clean up a few things. We talked about trucking shortage and truckers. You know, a lot of the problems in the trucking industry are bad government policies or government policies that were well intended on safety and other issues, environment, that have led to big problems in the industry. The hours of service over the years has limited truck drivers, created a lot of inefficiencies, driven up the cost of transportation. The Tier 4 environmental standards that are imposed upon big trucks are driving up the cost of those big trucks $20,000 or more. If somebody's trying to get in the industry, want to be an independent truck driver, that means they got to spend another $20,000 to go buy a truck. That's an impediment. That's not a good thing. The environmental standards are also ripe for failure on these trucks. These sensors go off, and at any time right now in our country, the trucking industry people in Minnesota tell me there are between 1,000 and 10,000 trucks on the side of the road or waiting for sensors to be fixed, because these things, when they go wrong, the trucks have to stop. It's a $1,000 tow. That's also not very good for the truck driver or the industry. And before you know it, they can't get the parts, and they're waiting for technicians. And so we got a lot of trucks that just are out of service all the time. Again, well-intentioned, but did we go too far with Tier 4 requirements that make, you go from here to here, but it's way more expensive? It's something to look at, but that's government. That's bad government in many instances. We look at the supply chain issues. Nobody today has really mentioned China. I mean, let's bring our jobs back from China. We should be doing what we can to have less manufacturing in China and more manufacturing in the United States, or countries that are neutral actors with us, that we can rely upon more freely. One of the things that bothers me about the Democrats' big reconciliation bill, massive transfer of dependency to China. Just look at energy. They have something in there called the Clean Electricity Plan. It's a remake of Obama's Clean Power Plan. They're going to decommission natural gas and coal-fired power plants in the United States and try to supplement that with intermittent energy in wind and solar. So it's not feasible, for one. It's going to drive up costs, and it's going to make it less reliable. If you like what's going on in Germany and California, where they have rolling brownouts, where the wind and solar weren't cutting it, and so they're begging for natural gas power, and they're spending 50% more in California and other places, this is what the Democrats want to do to you all across the country. I think it's a bad idea. But even worse, when you rely on wind and solar and electric vehicles, you're dependent upon China, because they have all the rare earth materials and minerals needed to produce the lithium, the cobalt, all those things that go into that. I don't know a patriotic American that thinks it's a good idea for the United States to depend upon our electricity and our vehicles to communist China. I can't figure that one out, but it's something that people have to start wrapping their hands around. Lastly, on Mr. Mafumi and others talked about work for welfare. Well, he kind of skewed that. When we talk about work for welfare or technical training requirements for people that collect welfare in this country, we're talking about able-bodied people without dependents. We're not talking about people taking care of families. We're not talking about people that can't go to work. And I'll just say it for the record again. I worked on this issue back in the 80s with Congressman Stanglin from Minnesota. We carried the bill that was the precursor to what Gingrich and Clinton and everybody did. It works every time. It's fair to the taxpayers. It's the right and compassionate thing to do for people who are out of work, and to try to encourage them to get private sector work. Helping people become self-sufficient and less dependent on government absolutely should be our goal. And when the folks on the other side say, "Oh, you're going to take them away from their families and they can't," that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about able-bodied folks who don't have any dependents. And 71% of them have no income, so according to the latest statistics. So they're certainly capable of getting out there, particularly when we have 11 million jobs available, and everybody in southern Minnesota and across this country, every business is begging for work. With that, I'll yield back.
The gentleman yields back, and now I recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Donalds, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I associate myself with the comments of my colleague from the great state of Minnesota. Mr. Lowe, I want to come to you. You said in your opening statement that you are supportive of the bipartisan infrastructure plan. Is that correct?
That is correct, Mr. Congressman.
Mr. Lowe, do you know what percentage of that actual bill actually goes towards infrastructure? Roads, bridges, construction materials. Do you know what percentage of that bill actually goes towards it?
In regards to the 3.5 trillion or the 1 trillion?
I'm dealing with the 1.2 trillion. That other thing isn't even infrastructure. I don't care what they say.
Yeah, okay.
With respect to the $1.2 trillion bill, you know what percentage actually goes towards actual construction costs?
I do not.
All right. So that's about anywhere between, depending on what you want to put into the bucket, anywhere between $130 billion to $200 billion of the 1.2 trillion. Still support it? Next question. Don't answer that one. So my next question is, with respect to your business and shipping costs, this is really supply chain that we're talking about. In that bill, there is without a doubt, there are going to be tax increases on energy production in the United States. That is the lifeblood of every business. Your colleagues that are our witness panel today, to keep the lights on in this place all across the country, there are going to be tax increases on energy production. Since we already know, because it was said by Mr. O'Brien, that 40% of the inputs into shipping is energy costs, and that bill is going to increase energy costs in the United States into a framework that is already strained by extended costs in the shipping area, is it something, in your opinion, that small business owners should be supporting, which are tax increases into the energy framework of our economy that will also increase the costs on freight and shipping, which are already heightened in the United States? Is that something, in your opinion, as small business owners would support?
Thank you for your question, Mr. Donalds. That is a great question, and I'd be happy to get back to you on the implications of that. Is related to infrastructure with our business and our product itself. We build retaining walls, and in the infrastructure bill, we're looking at building roads, building bridges, and retaining walls are a huge part of that as infrastructure. That's where the support comes from any infrastructure support from our business.
Mr. Lowe, I got a follow-up question for you on that one, because I only got 2 minutes and 25 seconds.
Sure.
Here's my follow-up question to that. I totally understand you as a business owner wanting to make sure you have all the necessary revenue and jobs lined up for the continuation of your business model, to continuation for your employees, the continuation for your owners, shareholders, however your company is formed. Is it appropriate, I'm going to use this phrase, is it fair and is it equitable for your enterprise to be able to get additional revenue into your business associated with this bill? Meanwhile, other businesses in our country who would never get a construction or infrastructure contract, the costs on them associated with freight will precipitously increase, because the bill you support will increase energy costs in the United States, which will also increase freight and delivery costs in the United States. Do you believe it is fair and equitable for all small business owners to basically be hamstrung by the bipartisan infrastructure bill, even though in your specific enterprise you might seek to benefit from the infrastructure bill? Is it fair and equitable?
Thank you for your question, and I'm not qualified to answer that question.
Mr. Lowe, hold on a second, because I missed the introduction page over here. Say with me, Mr. Lowe. Mr. Lowe, for the record, because I don't have the sheet in front of me, what is your title with your company? What is your position?
Director of the Customer Engagement Team.
So you're Director of Customer Engagement?
That's correct.
So you've not had any conversation with the owners of your company?
I've had lots of conversations with the owner of my company, absolutely.
They support the infrastructure bill?
We support infrastructure bill to go after roads and bridges construction, to continually gain the revenue need for our 120 independently owned and operated businesses, so that they can continue to provide great retaining walls for bridges, for roads, for municipalities, and for government DOTs.
Mr. Lowe, I have a question for you. My final question for you.
Yes, sir.
Do you want to see your electricity prices increase? For you, not your company, just for you and your home.
I do not want to see my prices increase.
Mr. Lowe, why would you support a bill that's going to increase the cost of electricity just for your home? Don't answer that question, Mr. Lowe. Here's what I'll leave the American people with, Mr. Chairman. Americans like the word infrastructure. I completely understand why. But that bill is far more than infrastructure. It will unilaterally remake our energy matrix. It will increase the cost on all Americans, whether you get a government
The gentleman's
contract
time
or
has
not.
expired.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Not seeing any other interest in questioning, I'll make a closing statement. My colleague from Florida asked about the infrastructure bill. Let me just read the components of it. Since the question was asked, $110 billion for roads and bridges, $55 billion for water infrastructure, $66 billion for railroads, $65 billion for broadband, $17 billion for ports, $17 billion for ports. Our ports in the United States of America are significantly underfunded and pale in comparison to ports around the world. $25 billion for airports, $65 billion for the electric grid, including another $50 billion to make it more resilient. It is a bill that generated 19 Republican senators' support, including the minority leader, Mr. McConnell. I leave the data and the facts as they are. I want to thank all our witnesses for being with us today. This is tough stuff. We are here to support small businesses. Condemnation doesn't go too far, conversation does. And I want to thank my colleagues on both sides of the aisle who share my interest in identifying the problems, but most importantly, finding solutions. The pandemic has upended a lot in our lives. It has exposed weaknesses, including for small businesses, including particularly our supply chain. It is a complex system, our supply chain. There is no magic solution. I was hoping we might come here today and find that magic wand that we could just solve this problem. The truth is, I didn't hear one actionable solution that we could implement today to solve the problem. We have to make investments. Long-term, strategic, thoughtful, and intentional by both Democrats and Republicans. That's the spirit of this committee. That's what I hope we do. It's going to take strong leadership. We can do a few things. The Biden administration, of course, this week announced that they would extend operating hours for our major ports to 24 hours, something that competitors around the world at their ports are already doing. Those are small steps that we can take. I salute the administration for doing so. With that, we will close this meeting, and I would ask for unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days to submit statements and supporting materials for the record. Without objection, so ordered. And if there is no further business to come before the committee, we are now adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Man, talk about timing, huh? I just got done lugging all of my new shelving and shirt boxes and all that stuff from my truck to my office, but someone parked blocking like our rear driveway that comes all the way up to the other side of my office. So I had to carry it all in, which kind of sucks because I'm a little winded, but it is what it is. So I didn't get to listen to that because I was working. So hopefully there was some good things. Some good things. Let me see what other hearings there are on right now. I know there's quite a few scheduled. Let me see. Today is not Thursday. Today is Wednesday. I don't know. There's nothing really. Let me see what else. No, there's a lot of hearings today, to be honest, but not a lot that are relevant. Let's check on the House and see how the House is doing. Hold on. Damn, I am sweaty. You guys can't see, I don't think. The House is now in recess until 12 o'clock, which is any minute now. So maybe we'll throw that up. Jen Psaki has a press gaggle on Air Force One at 3:30, so we're not going to cover that because that's just the audio, and I hate watching those. Actually, I have this open right now. No, this is the old one. Refresh this. Woo, it's hot. So I'm trying to get a lot of stuff done today in terms of organizing. Like I just went nuts and bought $700 worth of shelves and storage containers for the front to try to get organized because I can't, like right now, I can't find large sweatshirts. I know I bought 10 of them. I can't find them though. And I have 2 orders that I need to print out with the F Joe Biden, and I don't know where they are. So I need to try to get organized. Tomorrow, I'll be doing a show, but it may be late because I have to go pick up a Penske truck at 6 p.m. tomorrow night because I couldn't find a rental car to go pick up the RV on Friday. So I actually rented a rental truck, and it's going to cost me $700 to do a one-way rental on it. But, you know, you got to do what you got to do to get stuff. So tomorrow's show will likely not be at 7 o'clock. It'll probably be 7:30 or 8 o'clock. Tonight, depending on tonight I'm going to do a show. I have to do a show, especially after yesterday. But let's watch the House for a little bit, see what happens in the House as I continue to work, and we'll go from there. They may just adjourn for the day, to be honest, because they're a bunch of lazy people. We could watch the vice president who's hosting a roundtable with workers. And then we also have another hearing, enhancing public health legislation to protect children and families. You know what? Maybe we should watch this instead. It looks like it may be a little bit more entertaining. These are our lazy-ass lawmakers. Let's go over here.
Yes, today, starting from the broadest level of maternal and infant health all the way down to issues around lead poisoning or around other issues. Generally around health inequity, this country faces those challenges across the board. The
House will be in order. The prayer will be offered by Chaplain Kibben.
Would you pray with me? Holy God, heaven and earth are held in your hand. You who have determined the number of stars and given each their name. You who have set the Pleiades and Orion in the sky. You are our North Star, the constant in this changing universe, and we look to you for direction. Cast our eyes upon your brightness, that we would discover the immutability of your character and revive our strength. In a world full of variables, may your unchanging nature ever be our guard and stay. When there is no one on whom we can rely, may we rely on you. When there is nothing we can trust, may we trust you. When we are lost, adrift in the sea of confusion, may we anchor ourselves in you. And when we are fearful for our lives or livelihood, may you be our source of courage and purpose. These are not lofty desires, O God, but pure, unvarnished, and honest needs that we lay before you. You, O Lord, do not change. You are the same yesterday, today, and forever. Your word is alive and enduring. In this, may we find hope. In your strong and eternal name we pray. Amen.
Thank you. Pursuant to Section 11 of House Resolutions 188, the Journal of the Last Day's Proceedings is approved. The Pledge of Allegiance will be led by the gentlewoman from Oklahoma, Ms. Beese.
United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Ms. Bice. The chair will entertain up to 15 requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition?
Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute revising the statute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today in unity with Americans suffering from ALS and their families who are desperate for effective treatments and one day a cure. I made it my mission to pass the Act for ALS Act because people with ALS deserve a chance to fight the disease. They deserve a research and development infrastructure that is compassionate today while looking to the future. My friend Brian Wallach, who was diagnosed with ALS 4 years ago, told Congress that this fight is the closing argument for his life. I can't look him in the eye and tell him we have to wait. None of us should. I am profoundly grateful to each and every one of the 325 co-sponsors of this bill, as are families impacted by ALS all around the country. This is the most co-sponsors of any bill that has not yet gotten a vote in this Congress. It is time for us to act. It is time to act for ALS. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The September 21st Post and Courier of Charleston, South Carolina editorialized
You notice
an
Nancy
analysis
Pelosi already took
of
off.
the irresponsible Biden tax and borrow schemes destroying jobs. Quote, what would you call a neighbor who spent lavishly to redecorate his house but ignored the badly leaking roof? Perhaps foolish, irrational, or just plain dumb. Now, what would you call a Congress seemingly bent on enacting costly enactments while existing programs are headed for devastating benefit cuts? Some of these same words come to mind. At the end of August, the Treasury Department issued the annual reports of the trustees for Social Security and Medicare that show that these trust fund programs are scheduled to run out of money. There are very serious fiscal problems, but Congress instead is focusing on legislation to expand entitlements, hurting their children in the long run, while millions of elderly are thrown into poverty. End of quote. In conclusion, God bless our troops who successfully protected America for 20 years as the global war on terrorism continues, moving from Afghanistan to America. Our sympathy to the family of General Colin Powell. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to honor the life and legacy of Kevin Hayes. Kevin was diagnosed with colorectal cancer at the age of 28. He fought a 7-year battle against it that was courageous and inspiring. He made it his mission to raise awareness about the second leading cause of cancer deaths in America. Kevin founded the Colon Corps, led the Blue Hope Hard Hat Initiative, and got involved with the American Cancer Society and the National Colorectal Cancer Alliance to promote early detection and screening. Kevin was a gifted, nationally recognized messenger, charismatic and kind, with a mischievous smile and a great sense of humor. To his beloved wife, Hillary, beautiful family and loved ones, cherish your memories of Kevin and know that there will always be light to guide you from the love he gave you. I stand here today to recognize the many lives saved thanks to the advocacy of Kevin Hayes and to carry his message of love and encouraging colon cancer screening forward. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Rise to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, President Biden and Democrats are pushing to pass a multi-trillion-dollar socialist spending agenda that would be the largest tax and spending increase in our nation's history, and it's frankly money we don't have. At a time when families and businesses are struggling to deal with President Biden's reckless economic policies, the Democrats are pushing to spend trillions of more dollars to fund their radical, socialistic, and costly policies. Just a few of the Democrats' far-left socialist policies will hit small business with a larger tax bill, impose costly Green New Deal mandates that simply won't work, increase our energy dependency on Russia and China, weaponize the IRS to target American families, and monitor $200 per week bank transactions. I will continue to stand against the Democrat socialistic tax and spend spree that will limit our freedoms, make our country less competitive, and destroy Main Street America. Their agenda is anti-American. In God we trust. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from New York seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I wish to address the chamber for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, we have a choice. We can work to save our planet and become a global leader in green technology, or we can allow our planet to become uninhabitable. We must choose to protect our planet, the only home we have. Transitioning to electric vehicles will dramatically reduce carbon emissions and will create a cleaner world for our children. That's why my committee approved billions of dollars to transition the Postal Service and GSA fleets to electric vehicles and providing the necessary charging infrastructure across the country in the postal offices. This will fund more than 300,000 electric vehicles. That's more electric vehicles than were sold across the entire country last year. I urge my colleagues to support the Build Back Better plan, which includes funding for electric vehicles that will greatly help our environment. And I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Illinois seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. Americans miss President Donald Trump. Under the Biden administration, we have a supply chain crisis, an energy crisis, a border crisis, an Afghanistan crisis, and an economic crisis that threatens every bank account and paycheck that we earn. Americans are scared and losing hope after 9 months of the Biden-Harris administration. Under President Trump, we had a roaring economy. We had energy independence. Our border was secure and our enemies feared our resolve. The radical left is attempting to destroy our economy and the American way of life. But every crisis created by the Biden administration is only a reminder of how great it was to have an American president who put America first. Today marks the 9 months of the Biden administration, and my constituents miss President Trump more now than ever. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Massachusetts seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of the Build Back Better agenda. We have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to address climate change, and we must pass the Clean Electricity Performance Program, which uses a novel carrot-and-stick approach to reduce emissions by state utilities. I further support instituting a carbon tax, which would make corporations pay for their harmful pollution and ensure our planet remains habitable for our children. Furthermore, as we invest in clean energy infrastructure to replace harmful fossil fuels, we must end the Trump tariffs on $360 billion worth of Chinese goods. These tariffs artificially increase the cost of materials in solar panels, wind turbines, and other products we need to power our economy with clean energy. Together, we can enact President Biden's agenda to turbocharge the clean energy economy and create good jobs. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Oklahoma seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for up to 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to address the ongoing crisis at the southern border. The Biden administration has actively opened the border, and it is directly harming our country by dwindling resources, endangering communities, and emboldening terror threats. I recently visited the Del Rio, Texas sector to hear straight from our Customs and Border Patrol agents, Texas National Guard, and Texas State Troopers. In just one station within the sector, apprehensions have multiplied at an alarming rate, going from 7,400 last year to more than 90,000 in 2021. And agents have detained people from more than 90 countries. While the humanitarian aspect of this crisis is disturbing, I'm more concerned with the growing national security threats to our country. Nearly 10,000 individuals with criminal convictions have been arrested in fiscal year 21, attempting to illegally cross into the U.S., compared to just 2,400 last year. Mr. Speaker, securing and regulating our border is crucial in keeping our country secure, functioning, and most importantly, safe from external threats. I urge my colleagues to work towards creating meaningful legislation to provide Customs and Border Patrol agents with much-needed resources to firmly protect our border. Mr. Speaker, thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Wisconsin seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I rise to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to congratulate Trig Solberg and his wife Tula on the 50th anniversary of their business, T.A. Solberg Company, which operates several supermarkets, fuel, and convenience stores throughout northern and central Wisconsin. Trig and Tula started their first business together in 1971 with a single small store in Land O'Lakes, Wisconsin. Today, they operate several stores in the communities of Rhinelander, Minocqua, Eagle River, and Tomahawk, employing more than 1,200 people. The Northwoods of Wisconsin is dear to the Solbergs, so they make sure each of their stores keeps the personality of the region intact. I can attest that Trig is admired by staff, colleagues, and industry peers for his dedication to his community and commitment to excellence. Congratulations again to Trig and Tula Solberg for 50 years in business and their service to Wisconsin. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I request unanimous consent for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I stand before you today to recognize the Greenville, South Carolina Foothills chapter of the Korean War Veterans Association for their exemplary work to ensure that all of South Carolina's fallen Korean War veterans are never forgotten. In 2016, Congress enacted legislation that authorized the Wall of Remembrance as an addition to the Korean War Memorial, but they didn't fund the project. In response, the Foothill chapter made it their mission to raise nearly $20,000 to cover the inscription costs of the 55 soldiers from Greenville County who died in combat during America's Forgotten War. After 4 tireless years, the Foothills chapter recently announced they raised $207,000, which is enough to provide inscriptions not only for the 55 soldiers from Greenville County, but for all 483 service members from South Carolina who were killed while serving their country in Korea, as well as 93 service members who were captured and held as prisoners of war. Once again, I'd like to recognize the Greenville Foothills chapter of the Korean War Veterans Association, and in particular, my friend, former State Senator Louis Vaughn, for carrying on the legacy of South Carolinians who made the ultimate sacrifice in Korea. With that, thank you. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Wisconsin seek recognition?
We'd like to speak for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Well, we had another week go by, and I didn't see the Vice President in charge of the Mexican border policy for this administration down there, so I felt I should go down and look around in the Yuma sector and report back to her or anybody in the majority party who wants to hear. These are the things that I don't think we've seen in the paper. I could talk for hours. One thing, a large number of the people crossing the border in the Yuma sector are throwing away their IDs on the ground. And if you want to, you can just stand there along the paths and see all the IDs that are just lying there. So you got to ask yourself, why, if I'm an immigrant, am I throwing away my ID before I check in with the Border Patrol? I must be hiding something. Okay, it means that they can't do a background check if I was in the United States in the past, or for that matter, there's going to be no record of when such and such a person left Colombia, say, and comes in the United States. We should require an ID to come here. We should no longer let people throw them out. Secondly, I, in the past, am under the impression that people can test positive to COVID, check in at a hotel, and just leave and come in the country. I now know that they do not require tests. These are 2 more things that I learned at the border. I invite the Vice President to come down there. Thank you much.
May expire. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the chair will postpone further proceedings today on motions to suspend the rules on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The House will resume proceedings on postponed questions at a later time. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from New York seek recognition?
I move that the House suspend the rules and agree to the bill, H.R. 1508, as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 1508, a bill to require a guidance clarity statement on certain agency guidance and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Maloney, and the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. LaTurner, will each control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from New York.
Thank you. I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on this measure.
Without objection.
And I yield myself as much time as I may consume. H.R. 1508 would require federal agencies to include a guidance clarity statement on the first page of guidance documents. I want to thank Representative Lukemeyer and Ranking Member Comer for working with us to perfect this bill. Federal rules, regulations, and guidance are complex, even at the best of times. For most Americans who do not spend hours per day reading through the Federal Register, guidance documents can be very confusing. This simple good government bill will help clarify for the public that guidance and agency guidance is intended to help guide the implementation of federal regulations, not to act as an additional legally binding rules. This is a bipartisan bill in both the House and in the Senate, which passed a Senate companion out of committee by voice vote. I urge my colleagues to support this legislation, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman from Kansas is recognized.
I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Agency guidance serves an important function in the federal regulatory system. Agency guidance helps regulated parties and the public understand how agencies will interpret the law and administer their programs. However, agency guidance can be and has been abused. For example, agencies can use guidance documents to intimidate small businesses and individuals into compliance with agency views, sometimes under the threat of enforcement action. Small businesses and ordinary individuals often do not have the legal resources or necessary background to understand when an agency statement is binding law. It can be difficult for them to determine what agency statements must be complied with versus what is merely a non-binding description of an agency's views on which they can push back. Agencies have been known to try to start enforcement actions based on mere guidance. Agencies also have been known to attempt to issue binding rules by quietly slipping what they intend to be rules in guidance documents. This clearly bypasses the Administrative Procedure Act's requirements that were put in place to protect regulated individuals and small businesses. The courts coined the term non-rule rule to describe this big government sleight of hand. And the courts have rightly struck down such rules that only appeared in agency guidance. The Guidance Clarity Act offers a simple solution to these problems. It requires agency guidance documents to include the following explicit statement. Quote, "The contents of this document do not have the force and effect of law and do not, of themselves, bind the public or the agency. This document is intended only to provide clarity to the public regarding existing requirements under the law or agency policies." End quote. With that stroke of the pen, gone will be the days in which agencies can use guidance documents to force small businesses and individuals to comply with non-binding agency views. Gone, too, will be the days of agencies trying to issue non-rule rules that bypass the Administrative Procedure Act's requirement for legislative rules. I thank the sponsor of the bill, the ranking member of the Small Business Committee, Blaine Luetkemeyer, who has worked tirelessly on this bill since it was first introduced. I thank Chairwoman Maloney for her speedy efforts to help make passage of this bill in a bipartisan way. And I also thank Senator James Lankford and the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Chairman Gary Peters for their critical efforts to achieve a bipartisan compromise on this legislation. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman is recognized. The gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman from Kansas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from Missouri, Blaine Luetkemeyer.
The gentleman from Missouri is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of my bill, the Guidance Clarity Act. The federal government produces hundreds of rules, regulations, and laws every year. Without the help of legal teams and consultants, individuals and small businesses cannot possibly keep up with everything that's coming out of Washington. The purpose of guidance is to assist those Americans in understanding rules and regulations and give them suggestions on how to adhere to all of these new regimes. Guidance is not approved by Congress, nor does it go through the federal rulemaking process, which allows for public input and legal scrutiny of agency actions. Guidance is not backed up by law, nor is it enforceable as law. It is quite simply a suggestion. Unfortunately, in past years, many regulators have threatened punitive action against businesses for not following guidance. That is unacceptable, and quite frankly, it is illegal. To be clear, I'm not talking about businesses breaking the law or ignoring federal regulations. Guidance documents are meant to clarify or to inform the public about policy topics and are not legally binding. Small businesses deserve clarity on what documents are legally binding and should not be punished for deviating from guidance documents. Regulators have no legal authority to enforce guidance, and any attempt to do so is an egregious abuse of power. On top of that, with thousands of guidance documents being produced, instead of achieving their intended goal, which is to provide clarity, they're causing even more confusion. With some regulators enforcing guidance while others do not, small businesses and entrepreneurs are driven deeper into the regulatory maze of the federal government. My bill is a very simple fix to that confusion. The Guidance Clarity Act ensures the first page of guidance documents includes a plain language statement declaring that guidance is not law, nor can it legally be enforced as law. This small but critical statement clarifies for citizens and regulators on the ground that guidance is meant to be helpful, a suggestion that can be put in place or completely ignored. It will help regulators do their jobs more efficiently, and small businesses who lack the resources to employ teams of lawyers continue to create jobs and grow the economy. I hope my colleagues on both sides of the aisle will agree that American small businesses have enough to worry about. They are working hard to keep their employees paid and their customers happy. They don't have time to worry about keeping track of and abiding by agency suggestions that were never meant to be anything more than just that. I want to thank Chairman Maloney, Ranking Member Comer, the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Turner, for their leadership in supporting the bill and bringing it to the floor. I encourage my colleagues to vote in favor of the Guidance Clarity Act and yield back, Mr. Speaker, the balance of my time. Thank you.
The gentleman reserves, and the gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, if the gentleman from Kansas has no further speakers, I am prepared to close.
Gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman reserves, and the gentleman from Kansas is recognized.
I have no further speakers, and I'm prepared to close as well, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thanks to the Guidance Clarity Act, small business owners and individuals across the country will soon have confidence that agency guidance, however helpful and clarifying it may be, is not legally binding. I urge my colleagues to support this necessary bipartisan legislation. I yield back the balance of my time.
Okay. The gentleman yields. The gentlewoman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I urge passage of 1508, and I thank very much Blaine Luetkemeyer for his leadership on it and the cooperation of Ranking Member Comer and all the teams on both sides working in support of it. I urge passage of it, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Okay. The gentlewoman yields. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 1508 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
Major urban area in this country. Can't talk about that, can't address those problems that real Americans care about. Nope, we're going to assault Americans' First Amendment rights. Can't talk about inflation, real wages gone down, can't talk about that, supply chain problems, empty shelves in the stores, can't talk about that. Nope. Gonna go after this. I hope every single Republican votes against this. I hope some Democrats decide that this is not how it's supposed to work. We just had a decision last year. The Mazur, these guys are obsessed with going after President Trump. We just had a decision in the Mazur case last year that says this is not how it's supposed to work. Slap back Congress because they wanted to get information that they weren't entitled to. They don't do the investigations, the executive branch does. Mr. Chairman, I look forward to questions.
Mr. Gates.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the chance to be in the Rules Committee. I don't frequent this room, but I feel quite at home with so many of my colleagues from the Judiciary Committee also serving on this panel. Mr. Chairman, January 6th was not a good day. But to my knowledge, there's been no charge of insurrection or terrorism. Largely, the charges that have been levied against those who were involved in breaking the law result in property damage charges. And it's my expectation that if there are folks who broke the law, they should be treated no better or no worse than anyone else who breaks these particular laws. But all of this is ridiculous. Mr. Chairman, the American people are in trouble. I was recently in Qatar on a bipartisan delegation led by Mr. Issa, and we learned directly that thousands upon thousands of Afghans were let into our country with principally no vetting, no screening. The general we met with at the base in Doha said that refugees were merely handed a blank sheet of paper, and whatever they wrote on it was deemed their paper passport. And people are concerned about that. On our border, we functionally have a turnstile. I never believed that President Biden could be worse than President Obama on the border, but we've gone from the Obama days of catch and release to the Biden days of import and release, where people are being really beckoned across the border as a consequence of our policies and then shuttled around the country. And our supply chain issues have come to the forefront of the minds of so many of Americans. I mean, supply chain used to be something people learned about in economics class. And now the supply chain issues are resulting in inadequate access to things that people need. And we see the Washington Post tell Americans to just lower their expectations regarding the American economy. I was recently at the Port of Long Beach. I saw just, cargo ship after cargo ship. You could about walk from the Port of Long Beach to the Channel Islands in California without ever having your feet touch the water on cargo ships that cannot come into port because of a total failure of the U.S. economy. Our country has been humiliated abroad in Afghanistan, where reliance on this strategy of an Afghan government being left to facilitate American departure and withdrawal turned out to be a total fiction. And yet here we are reviewing Steve Bannon's podcast. The average American, when they wake up, I don't think one of the first 100 things they think about is Steve Bannon's podcast, the things he said before or after January 6th. I think that is a uniquely Washington obsession. And it wouldn't be so damaging to our country if it wasn't absorbing the capacity of the Congress to meet the actual challenges that the American people are facing. I mean, do you really think that your constituents are out there hoping that you guys are here sharing your hot takes on Steve Bannon's podcast rather than dealing with the inflation that is crushing them, the border crisis that is concerning them, the problems we have abroad? It's truly shameful that this is got the focus and the obsession of so many in the Congress. There's been discussion today about Mr. Bannon's response being one of total and complete defiance. I believe those are the words that my colleague from Colorado used. But that's not true. Mr. Bannon simply wants claims of executive privilege to be resolved. And I am not competent to resolve those questions. I don't know if those claims are meritorious or not. But I do think that a person, when presented with such demands from the January 6th committee, might reasonably want those questions to be resolved in the absence of some total and complete defiance. We saw this in the Don McGahn scenario, where once the constitutional questions and legal issues were resolved, Mr. McGahn came in and we were able to have an interview. Much has been said today about the failing institutions in America and who is to blame for them. So many of my colleagues on the left talk about Trump being this savage against our institutions and that our institutions are all going to fail because of Trump and the insurrectionist Republicans. But truly, this is a case of projection. After the 2016 election, Democrats repeatedly called President Trump an illegitimate president. They damaged the institution of our electoral process by claiming that Trump was a Russian agent. How phony and fake that all turned out to be. We've even seen the Democrats back institutions that have done great violence to our sense of justice. When the FBI was changing evidence in a secret court to go after President Trump and his allies, they certainly were able to rely on my colleagues on the left to have their back. And the US dollar is a pretty important institution to American families. And the policies being considered by the majority in this Congress would crush the dollar. It would punish savers and seniors, leading to massive inflation, getting people caught with real impact on their lives that go beyond your perception of Steve Bannon's podcast. So this week, it is the institution of Congress that is failing to meet the needs of the people. But in the prior panel, we heard Chair Thompson and Congresswoman Cheney really give up the game, because this isn't about a contempt proceeding. Everything the American people are watching today is about the inward turning of our national security apparatus and law enforcement against political rivals. Mr. Thompson, Chairman Thompson, talked about criminal contempt referrals. I would proffer to the committee that Chairman Thompson knows exactly why he made that statement, because he knows there are willing hands at the Department of Justice ready to receive such a referral and to criminalize our politics. Mr. Bannon wants to wait to see if there is a privilege issue resolved by a court, and as a consequence, this is all just theater to set up the utilization of criminal process against Steve Bannon. We also heard Congresswoman Cheney echo those very themes. In her comments regarding Leader McCarthy, someone that I don't agree with in all circumstances, Congresswoman Cheney said that Mr. McCarthy had been especially active in blocking the January 6th committee. Those words were chosen on purpose because obstructing a congressional investigation, as we all know, is a crime. And so this isn't about Mr. McCarthy's discussions, this isn't about his perspective, this isn't about his votes or his speeches. This is about setting up people like Steve Bannon and Kevin McCarthy for criminal process. And the American people need to know that has begun now. It began in that committee, and this is another step along the way to criminalize political activity. But the American people should also know it's not just the Kevin McCarthys and the Steve Bannons that are going to be targeted. It's not just going to be the powerful and the rich and the famous and people you see on TV. And the tell for that is that the federal government is going to be reviewing transactions over $600. That's what they want to do. And the whole reason that's the case is because it's not going to be an effort exclusively against those with money and power. It is going to be an effort against regular Americans to criminalize their politics. My friends, Democrats need January 6th right now more than ever. They need it because they can't pass a bill. I mean, this isn't Republicans. This was the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Gottheimer, and others in the Blue Dog Caucus saying, we were promised a vote on the infrastructure bill, and it is a betrayal of the trust that we have with Speaker Pelosi that vote didn't occur. So here we are. You can't get an infrastructure bill. You can't get a reconciliation bill. You can't meet the needs of the country. The border is a mess. Afghans are coming in unvetted. The dollar is crumbling. The economy is failing. Supply chain issues are hurting Americans' families. And you desperately need to obsess about January 6th. I would suggest that you need to move on, and the American people are ready to move on. But if we are going to obsess about calls for violence, it would be important to note that there's a good amount of hypocrisy in this Democrat-led effort. For example, when Congresswoman Maxine Waters called on Democrats to physically intimidate President Trump's cabinet officials, there was no such effort for contempt or review or committees or commission. Congresswoman Waters said, let's make sure we show up wherever we have to show up. And if You see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd and you push back on them and you tell them they're not welcome anymore. It was a Democrat Missouri state senator who said, I hope Trump is assassinated. It was former Attorney General Eric Holder who said, no, when they go low, we kick them, referring to Republicans. Physical kinetic energy against your political opponents. Speaker Pelosi called President Trump an imposter and said it is dangerous to allow the American voters to evaluate his performance in the 2020 election. Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley urged unrest on the streets. She said, you know, there needs to be unrest in the streets as long as there is unrest in our lives. We saw our country face violence and vandalism for months during the summer of 2020. Where was the commission to evaluate that unfortunate activity? In 2017, Speaker Pelosi said, our election was hijacked. There is no question. Congress has a duty to protect our democracy and follow the facts. So I guess in that case, protecting our democracy meant destabilizing the presidency. And now, all of this pomp and circumstance to preserve it. We heard Speaker Pelosi also say, quote, I'm counting down the hours till he's gone. I plan to pull him out of there by his hair, his little hands and feet. Governor Cuomo talked about physical violence that New Yorkers ought to engage in against President Trump. He said, quote, he can't have enough bodyguards to walk through New York City. Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer said 86-45. Get it? Senator Warren actually sent up a meme that called for MAGA death. So again, I sense from the was that time expiring, Mr. Chairman? There's no time limit? All right, well, I'm sort of just getting, I got a little more to lean in here.
We don't have a time limit in the Rules Committee, although we should rethink it.
Hey, anytime I can inspire congressional reform, I'm always eager to do so. You know, again, Mr. Chairman, time and again, we see these calls for violence. We see actual violence that was far more grave and far more damaging to our country throughout the summer of 2020 than the unfortunate acts on a bad day on January 6th. And I would encourage the committee and the Congress to do what the American people have done, move on from this, and let's focus on the actual issues that affect them. And I appreciate the committee's indulgence, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. Mr. Jordan, when you appeared before the Rules Committee earlier this year in January, I asked you to say 5 simple words. The election was not stolen. And you were unwilling to say them then. Can you say those 5 words today?
I've never said it was stolen, Mr. Chairman. I'll give you the same answer. Never said it was. I said we should investigate it. I said on January 6th, when the electoral votes were counted, that Joe Biden is president of the United States. And if you got a problem with that, I don't understand it. The real question is why don't you guys want to investigate what happened?
You said a lot of words just now, but unfortunately, you're still unwilling to say those 5 simple words. And I think that's incredibly important. You know, pushing debunk conspiracy theories and
not pushing any conspiracy
to the fire when it comes to
your obsession with 5 words seems pretty ridiculous to me.
Yeah, and you know, this works better. I mean, I'll let you speak, and then you can let me speak, and that's the way we work it here. But you know, we saw on January 6th how misinformation could lead some people to violence and ultimately endanger our democracy. Mr. Jordan, on July 27th, you were asked by Brett Baier on Fox News if you talked to the former president on January 6th. And you didn't give a clear answer. You said, and I quote, I've talked to the president so many, I can't remember all the days I've talked to him, but I've certainly talked to the president, end quote. The next day, on July 28th, you confirmed to Spectrum News that you spoke with the former president on January 6th. When asked by a Spectrum News reporter, Taylor Popolars, whether you spoke to the president before, during, or after the Capitol was attacked, you said, and I quote, I spoke with him that day, after, I think after. I don't know if I spoke with him in the morning or not. I just don't know. I have to get back to you. I don't know when those conversations happened, end quote.
Yep.
So my question is, you've had 84 days since that interview to go back and check the records. So when did you speak with the former president on January 6th? Did you talk to the former president before, during, or after the attack on the Capitol?
Of course I've talked to the president.
All 3?
Of course I've talked to the president. I've been clear about that. I talk to him all the time. This is not about me, Mr. Chairman. I know you want to make it about me. You want to make it about individuals, other individuals. But this is about the lack of a proper security presence that day. That's what this committee, if this committee is going to do something that's worthwhile, that's what they should be investigating. Of course I talked to the president. I talked to him that day. I've been clear about that. I don't recall the number of times. But it's not about me. I know you want to make it about that, but this is about the, why wasn't, how about this? Why wasn't the National Guard here that day, Mr. Chairman?
If I can reclaim my time, I just want...
Have you asked that question? Have you asked the Speaker, why wasn't the National Guard here?
No, my question to you, I'm asking the question to you.
And I gave you the answer.
Did you talk to the president, former president, before, during, or after the attack on the Capitol? Or was it all three? The reason why I ask is, you had 84 days since you said you couldn't remember, and you would check. So if you could just clarify the record, was it before, during, or after the attack on the
I talked to the president after the attack.
So not before or during?
Right.
Okay, and
And I've been clear about that.
Well,
but here, let me ask you a question. You brought up January 6th?
All right. But my understanding is that you said to a reporter from Politico that you spoke to him during. So is now after the attack, or you?
During? No, I did not speak to the president during the attack.
So you admitted to speaking to the former president on January 6th, the same day you voted to overturn the election. Facts be damned. And although you've routinely suggested that you're just another member of Congress, speaking with the president, your name comes up again and again in regards to efforts to overturn the election. There is even reporting that back on December 27th, then President Trump spoke with then acting Attorney General Jeffrey Rosen and others to discuss how to reverse Biden's win. An official who was on that call, Richard Donahue, notes you, Mr. Jordan, as a lawmaker who was referenced. This is the same meeting where President Trump told the Justice Department, according to handwritten notes by Mr. Donahue, and I quote, "Just say that the election was corrupt and, quote, leave the rest to me and our congressman." Did you discuss with President Trump a coordinated effort to overturn the results of the election?
I have no idea what you're talking about. I have no idea what that is. Of course not. But you brought up January 6th, Mr. Chairman?
What?
You brought up January 6th, and you said we tried to overturn the results of the election by simply objecting?
No, I just know he said by objecting.
Here's what I know.
Let me say, I don't know.
Okay, well, I hope I get a chance to respond at some point.
I just don't know of another member of Congress who is deeply enmeshed in all of this as you are, and apparently you're unwilling to give some of the more specific answers to this committee today. I guess, are you willing to tell the Select Committee what you know about events leading up to, during,
I've been clear all along. I've got nothing to hide. I've been straightforward all along.
And just so you know, I mean, I'm looking here. This is a Politico story here. The quote here says, "Look, I definitely spoke to the president that day. I don't recall. I know it was more than once. I just don't recall the times." This is to Olivia Beavers. And you later said that I'm sure that one of the Trump-involved calls took place in the safe room because we were in that room forever. I mean, that's what you...
Yeah, after the thing, that's what I said. But what does this have to do with, Steve Bannon? What does this have to do with Steve Bannon's contempt?
I'm just,
I thought that's why we were here.
Yeah, well, in your opening, you didn't mention Steve Bannon. Mr. Gates did.
No, I mentioned, yes, I did mention Bannon's name. I mentioned it very first.
You talked about inflation.
No, I did. No, I didn't. I said there are 4 batches of subpoena. The first batch, Bannon, Meadows, Patel, Scavino, first name I mentioned. You got to go back. I'm sure the reporter can bring up the record.
Yeah, I think what I come away listening to your opening statement is that you're more outraged by people asking questions.
Not at all.
Than police being beaten.
I'm more outraged by the attack on people's First Amendment liberties.
Beaten here on January 6th, and the lives of the people who work for all of us being at risk.
January 6th, Mr. Chairman, can I respond to something?
Yeah, you may.
January 6, 2017, guess who the first person was to object to counting the electoral college results for Mr. Trump? Guess who it was?
It was me.
It was you. Guess which state?
Alabama.
Which state? Alabama, a state President Trump won by 30 points. So you can object to Alabama on January 6, 2017, and for 4 years, You guys can go after President Trump, the Trump-Russia investigation. You can do that for 4 years. In October of 2020, Hillary Clinton said just weeks before the election, she said the 2016 election was stolen for her. So you guys can investigate that, all based on lies, for 4 years. We're not allowed to ask questions for 4 minutes about the 2020 election. We're not allowed to object in Pennsylvania where they unconstitutionally changed their election law, but you can object to Alabama?
No, well, I'm glad you raised that issue, all right?
Mr. Raskin can object to Florida?
All right, it's my time now. So I raised the issue of Russian interference in our election. I also raised the issue of voter suppression, which was a real concern in that election. I took the action, and I said at the time, it's a symbolic action. I had no senator to join with me, but I wanted to make sure that the issue of voter suppression and potential
So it's okay for you to do it?
excuse me, please. There's a difference here. I did not organize a rally or have meetings to actually plan and undermine an election.
I didn't either.
And the Capitol wasn't attacked before I made my objection.
There's a difference. The difference being where Democrats are allowed, but Republicans
Mr. Jordan,
aren't.
if you don't want to testify here, you're free to leave.
You keep saying all kinds of things. Don't give me a chance to respond.
Seriously, I've given you a chance to respond. You won't let me get a question out.
All right, go ahead.
All right?
Ask your question.
The Capitol wasn't attacked before or after I made my objection. The vice president wasn't rushed to a secure location. His life wasn't threatened. President Obama at the time didn't tweet out a video saying he loved rioters. There wasn't even a vote on my objection. So there's a false equivalency here as an attempt to whitewash what happened on that terrible, terrible day.
I'm not trying to
I was the
whitewash
last person off the floor on January 6th. And I came face to face with these people in the speaker's gallery. And I will tell you, if you want me to describe what evil looks like, it's looking to those faces, those people who, while 3 police officers were in front of the door trying to protect all of us, they were smashing the windows open to get at people. And so, the notion that there's all this outrage today over people asking questions, and there's not outrage over the fact that the police, the Capitol Police, who are here to protect us and who do protect us every day, were beaten. People lost their lives. Others' lives were threatened. The fact that somehow we asking questions about trying to figure out why did this happen, who is responsible, that somehow that is a bad thing. Give me a break. Give me a break. I mean, one of you mentioned political theater. This is not political theater, I don't know what is, but let me just say one of the most genuine statements that I have heard uttered in the Capitol was by Vice Chair Cheney, who, to her credit, is embracing the truth and asking her Republican colleagues to join with her in making sure that the questions are answered in a way so the American people know what happened, so it never, ever, ever happens again. All of us are concerned about the future of our democracy in the aftermath of what happened. We don't ever want to see that happen again. So that's what this is all about. So we could talk about inflation, we could talk about the border, you could talk about whatever you want to talk about. Fine. You're at the Rules Committee, you could talk about whatever the hell you want to talk about. But the bottom line is, I think what we're doing here today is absolutely necessary.
Can I respond?
You may.
I'm not trying to whitewash anything. Republicans have been consistent. We have condemned violence every stinking time it happened. We condemned it on January 6th, and 600 people are being prosecuted and held accountable for what they did wrong, as well they should be. But it would have been nice if you guys would have condemned the violence in the summer of 2020, instead of making statements like my colleague just read. It would have been nice, instead of the Vice President of the United States raising money to bail rioters out of jail, it would have been nice if you'd have done that. No. This double standard, you guys get to say all the things you did about Trump for 4 years. You get to have the summer of 2020 and call it peaceful protest. We condemn violence every single time. It'd have been nice if you guys had done the same. I am so sick of the double standard. Americans are so sick of the double standard.
Well, I think many of us did condemn it. I condemn violence wherever it may occur. But, let me just say this. You can yell and scream as much as you want. The bottom line is,
no, I'm not yelling and screaming.
We saw what we saw.
I'm reflecting where the American people are. They've had it with the double standard.
The American people saw.
You're allowed to object. We're not.
No, you could object. That's not the issue. Is not whether or not you raised an objection. Mr. Jordan. The issue is what transpired that day. The
No,
issue,
we had
the
nothing
issue
to
is
do
that
with
after
that.
all,
We had nothing
the
to
issue
do with
that
that.
after, well, we'll see. We'll see what the investigation
You
leads.
guys are-
But
you
after
guys
all of
lost
this
your
time,
mind.
still, you cannot say those 5 words that the election was not stolen. With that, I happy to yield to the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Cole.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Actually, I didn't have any questions for the last panel. I don't have any questions for this panel. But I know you came here to testify, Mr. Jordan, and I just want to make sure if there's another point that you had to make, that you have the opportunity to make it. Is there any particular concern you had? And I do want to make for the record, you should not be on trial here for, if somebody wants to talk to you, they can, charge you with something. I guess they could do that. Or if the select committee wants to call you, I guess they could do that. But I think you're here to talk about the testimony and, your view of the subpoena. So if you don't have anything to add on that, that's fine by me.
No, I mean, look, I thought this was about the subpoena. I'm concerned about what's happened to people's rights. I'm concerned about the double standard, as I've indicated. And look, as far as me personally, I talk to the president all the time. I talked to him that day. My understanding is, from my memory, I talked to him after the attack happened and we were moved to the chamber. I may have talked to him before. I don't know. But all I'm saying is I had nothing to do with any of this. So that to me is just,
Well,
you guys, they're
again,
Democrats' obsession.
Not what we're here to determine anyway. So with that, I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. Torres.
I think the American people can see the big difference between the previous panel, Mr. Chairman, and this panel. The previous panel who is eager to get to the truth, to get to an investigation, to get to preserving our democracy, standing up, having the courage to stand up for the rule of law. It's a huge difference. It's a huge difference between hiding the truth, accepting the fact that an insurrection happened, that we almost lost our lives. Some people may not care about their lives, but I care about mine, and I care about the lives of my colleagues, all of my colleagues, Republicans and Democrats. It is unfortunate that we continue to have this discussion, because what happens here in this temple of democracy, oftentimes happens outside of this U.S. Capitol. A woman was recently raped on a train. And while this woman was being violently assaulted, sexually harassed, the passengers stood there and did nothing. I stand corrected. They did something. They held up their cell phones and recorded the crime in progress. Police are investigating that. But there's more to the fact that a woman was raped, violated, assaulted in plain sight while riding a train. There's a moral issue of people just standing by and watching crimes happen and not caring about understanding what happened and how do we prevent that. I did not vote for the former president. I did not respect the former president's positions on pretty much anything. But I believe in the rule of law. And I went to the inauguration because it was my duty to do that. It is unfortunate that we have to look at the moral character of how people deny and try to twist the truth around what happened. People died. This is not about somebody being sexually assaulted or somebody paying to have sex with a young girl or somebody not, protecting people that are under their jurisdiction. This is about our democracy. This is about future generations of Americans that deserve to have liberty and justice for all. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you. Dr. Burgess.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hadn't intended to ask any questions, but I will confess Mr. Gates's recitation of issues struck a chord with me. I've been concerned about what I see on television, where it appears that there is a criminalization of dissent occurring. And then the current president, appeared to endorse that on a widely reported interview that he gave. And we do need to be careful. We're the people's house. We are where people come together to debate the big issues of the day, figure out how to spend the people's money. But the criminalization of dissent is it's a major concern to me. And I do worry about the direction we're going with some of the things I'm seeing, even at school board meetings where people are being told that they can't speak or it's inappropriate. I also, if I accept the assumption that this isn't about last summer, this is about everything that happened on January 6th on, we don't ever ask any questions about the automobile attack on the gate, where a policeman lost his life on Good Friday. We don't talk about protesters taking over Department of Interior. I mean, these are all recent events that happened in the case of the Department of Interior within the past week. Where are the headlines? Where are the stories? Where are the calls for investigation? They simply do not seem to be occurring. So forgive me if I'm looking at these activities today as being somewhat politicized and one-sided, but Mr. Gates, I did want to let you know I concur with your concern about the criminalization of what should be normal political speech and criminalization of dissent. And free to comment, yes, sir.
I thank the gentleman, and I would start by saying that I also value the lives of my Democrat colleagues, particularly the gentlelady from California, and I think everybody's glad that nobody was hurt, and I don't think there's a single Republican that wished that anyone lost their life or was harmed in any way. And, to Mr. Chairman's comments, in light of what Mr. Burgess said, this doesn't strike me as an eagerness for the truth as much as it strikes me as an eagerness for a prosecution, for the utilization of criminal process. And this is just one step along the way, not for the truth, but to get prosecutions going of people that are political opponents. I agree with the chairman that we never want anything like January 6th to happen again. I think that is a valuable and virtuous goal, but I reject the premise that the process we're going through now makes that less likely. Matter of fact, I think that when you have circumstances where we violate all sense of process and protocol to remove the minority leaders, chosen members of the committee, when we utilize preservation demands against the phone records of members of Congress and then have leaks illuminate that rather than giving people due process and the rule of law, which Congresswoman Torres spoke eloquently about, I don't think that any of this is moving us away from another violent event. I think, as a matter of fact, these hyper-partisan, questionable efforts that are so unprecedented may actually animate more violence on the right and the left, and that would be yet another failure of our institutions that no member, Republican or Democrat, would ever want to see. I thank the gentleman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Let me just again remind everybody here, just what I said in the previous panel, that there was a genuine attempt at a truly bipartisan commission. I inserted the record of the Republican leader. All the demands that he had made were acceded to, and that was rejected.
How does that inform on removing his
so if in fact,
now.
If in fact we could have moved that forward, the minority leader could have appointed you or Mr. Jordan or whoever else he wanted to be on that commission. The reality
So you're
was,
punishing him for it?
No, the reality was that basically it became clear that that amongst the leadership, there was no interest in getting to the truth, that there was only an interest in obstruction and sabotage. And so we had to move forward in a different way, not the way we wanted to.
Do you think it's helpful to say that because McCarthy didn't, live up to what you believed his commitments are, you're going to punish due process as an institution and the rule of law by removing Banks and Jordan from the committee?
We embraced due process, but we're interested in getting to the truth, Mr. Gates. And and there's a difference. And there's the difference. I think we are at odds on that. Mr. Perlmutter.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Listening to Mr. Jordan and Mr. Gates reminded me of old law school kind of statement. If you don't have the facts, argue the law. If you don't have the law, baffle them with bull. And I'd have to say to my friends, Mr. Gates and Mr. Jordan, I've never heard such an effort to obfuscate the question that we have before us. And I could only think of the word sophistry, which is the use of fallacious or specious arguments, especially with the intent to deceive. And I don't say that lightly, because these guys are my friends. I work with them on things. But I am very disappointed. And I'd say to Mr. Jordan, what happened on January 6th, that was a direct attack on liberty. That was a direct attack on freedom. That was a direct attack on people's right to vote. And the subpoena that the committee has issued has been ignored and defied. And the committee is within full rights, this Congress is within its full rights to demand the truth from Mr. Bannon, to demand that he appear. If he chooses, Mr. Gates, to plead the Fifth Amendment, that's his prerogative. But he doesn't have the prerogative to defy a subpoena as he has done. And so I'm going to be voting for this rule, and I yield back to the chair.
Thank you. Mr. Reschenthaler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Perlmutter was referencing law school. Mr. Perlmutter, if the bar knew how many days I skied my 3-0 year, they'd probably revoke my law license. And I know that you would probably appreciate that comment more than anybody. So there's been a lot said here today. But I think that really what we should focus on is just the issue, and that is that's looking at the case law. So we know that congressional subpoenas must address a valid legislative purpose and be related to and in furtherance of a legitimate task of Congress. So if you look at the case law, I'd say that's the only thing we should be looking at. It's a very narrow topic. Mr. Jordan, would you like to apply the facts as you see them to that narrow legal topic?
Yeah, we've said this from the get-go that it seems to me the appropriate questions to be asking are the lack of a proper security presence that day. Why weren't we prepared? Why weren't we ready? That's a legitimate legislative purpose, legitimate oversight function of the government, not what we see the committee engaging in now. That's where we should be focused. I think that's the reason Republicans weren't allowed to be on the committee, because we were raising those questions. And frankly, the only one that can truly answer those is the Speaker of the House. She's the one who has ultimate authority over the Sergeant of Arms. She's the one who's in control. But that's not where they want to go. They want to go on this obsession with President Trump, this obsession with going after people, even though the FBI is doing the investigation, and the FBI said there was no conspiracy, but they are prosecuting people who did wrong. And that's exactly what it should be. 600 of them. Over 600 of them. So That's what we want. I would, if I could, to the gentleman, just point out the previous member said fallacious here's the quote he used, fallacious arguments with intent to deceive. This is, you almost would laugh. I mean, for 4 years, we had the Trump-Russia collusion argument. 4 years of it. Spent $30 million. Bob Mueller come back and said there was nothing, no collusion, no conspiracy. They told us the dossier was real. They told us the Hunter Biden story was false. We now know, of course, it was true. They knew it was true at the time. We knew it was true at the time. They've actually told us in the past few months the border is secure. Mayorkas stood there and said the border is secure. Like, are you kidding me? And of course, they've said for 4 years that Hillary Clinton won the 2016 election. So they're allowed to say all that. Fallacious. They're allowed to make all those fallacious arguments with intent to deceive the American people, but we're not allowed to raise questions and concerns when over half the electorate had questions and concerns about the 2020 election.
Thanks, Mr. Jordan. I appreciate it. There's a
Mr.
really...
Reschadal, may I answer that question regarding the legal test?
I yield back. Right, sure.
Yeah, I think the real question there is whether or not setting up a criminal referral is a legitimate action of the Congress, right? Because you heard Chair Thompson and Congresswoman Cheney give up the game that this is all about setting up criminal process. So if it is an appropriate action for the Congress to engage in in committee work for the sole purpose of criminal referrals, then this would be under that purview. But there's a reason why the founders did not vest in the Congress criminal prosecution authorities, because to establish that balance of power, that requirement and that obligation resides elsewhere. So applying the legal test to the Bannon question, I think really does ripen the fact that this is about criminal process, not about oversight, not about legislation. And to reflect on the point Mr. Jordan made in responding to your question, the sophistry is that we're doing this in the first place. Is there a single American who believes that if the Democrats had a reconciliation deal and an infrastructure bill that we would be doing this week? Absolutely not. They'd be working on the legislative promises that they've made to constituents, but they can't get a bill. They can't deliver for the people. And so all of this January 6th obsession is the sophistry. And I yield back.
Thanks, Mr. Gates. I appreciate it. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. Raskin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, the first thing I wanted to say was to you, Mr. Chairman, you know, you acted very bravely on the evening of January 6th. You took the lectern, you took the dais after Speaker Pelosi and the Democratic and Republican leaders were escorted off of the floor, and you have not been sufficiently noted for what you did in keeping us going during that pivotal moment, and you were the last member to leave the House of Representatives, and you were very close to the scene where the insurrectionists were trying to break into the House of Representatives. So I just want to acknowledge that and acknowledge your courage in acting that night. Mr. Gates, welcome to the Rules Committee. It's good to see you.
Good to see you again.
One thing I do think I want to correct is that Chairman Thompson and Vice Chair Cheney never said that the purpose of this was to bring criminal referrals, that the purpose of the investigation was the purpose of the investigation is to get to the truth of the causes and the events constituting the attack on Congress and on the Capitol. So the purpose of this particular action is to coerce compliance by Steve Bannon, who is the only person out there who thinks that he's above the law. Now, but by all means, you can respond to that.
I would suggest using a phrase Mr. Bannon uses quite frequently, catch the signal, not the noise. The signal in the testimony from Chair Thompson and Ms. Cheney referenced criminal contempt and Mr. McCarthy's especially active efforts to block the committee. So I think that the signal they are sending is that that's the direction they want to go.
Catch the signal, not the noise. Okay. And you started off by saying that we're more concerned, I think, about Steve Bannon's podcast than we are about the truth of January 6th. I didn't know Steve Bannon had a podcast. Apparently...
well, did you listen to the statements of the...
I didn't know that that's where they were drawn from.
He referenced them in his opening.
Well, I knew that Steve Bannon was repeatedly saying on January 5th that all hell is going to break loose tomorrow. We are closing in on the target. He was saying it's unlike anything that you're going to expect, and so on.
Very similar to other political rhetoric.
Okay, fair enough. But here's the point. Let's just speak for real, if we could, Mr. Gates.
Only way I do it.
You've been on Steve Bannon's podcast 3 different times.
I think way more than 3.
Okay, at least 3 times that I could find just by Googling it here. So the only person mentioning Steve Bannon's podcast is you.
No, that's not true. The chairman actually mentioned it in his opening.
Okay, then I missed it. He was mentioning statements. He wasn't advertising the podcast or his slogan or whatever. But here's the question I want to ask you. Let's just start with basics. Do you accept that Joe Biden won the 2020 presidential election?
I accept that Joe Biden is the president.
Do you accept that he won the election by more than 7 million votes and defeated Donald Trump by 306 to 232 in the Electoral College, a margin that Donald Trump called a landslide when he beat Hillary Clinton by the same numbers?
I think that our election was uniquely polluted by these indiscriminate mail-in ballots. I think that this was the first time in America's history where the mailbox beat the ballot box.
Do you think there's any evidence that there was electoral corruption or fraud that materially altered the outcome of the presidential election, and where is that evidence?
I believe that had mail ballots not been sent to people who had not requested them, that Donald Trump would be sitting behind the Resolute desk.
Okay, but you don't think that there is, legally speaking, I know you're a lawyer because you went to the great law school, William & Mary. Legally speaking, there was no election fraud or no election corruption. Well, let's put it this way. Do you agree that 61 different federal and state courts, including 8 judges that Donald Trump appointed himself to the federal bench, have rejected every claim of electoral corruption or fraud that have been advanced? Do you agree with that?
I don't, and the reason is those claims are not evaluated because in many of the circumstances you reference, jurisdiction was the principal question. So I think it requires a review of the procedure.
Do you have any case authority in the land of those 61 cases or any other cases where a court has determined that there was electoral corruption or electoral fraud that materially affected the outcome of the election in any state in the union?
No court.
Do you have one?
Which I believe is a real failure of the judiciary. I think the Article 3 courts failed our country by not exercising more jurisdiction over those questions. Now, there's a difference in whether or not fraud existed and whether or not there's an adequate remedy, and I think also a number of those cases were kicked on remedies.
No court has said that fraud existed, and so there's no remedy because there's no violation, Mr. Gates.
Right, but you cannot
there's no violation, there's no fraud.
That there was no fraud if they didn't take up the question and review the facts on jurisdiction or remedy.
You know what? That might work on Steve Bannon's podcast, but that's not going to work in the Rules Committee of the United States House of Representatives. I'm sorry, Mr. Gates, forgive me. I've got some serious questions to ask you. The chairman of the January 6th committee, Chairman Thompson, and John Katko, who was the emissary of Kevin McCarthy, negotiated an agreement for an independent outside commission with 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, equal subpoena power, right down the middle. And yet Donald Trump decided he didn't like it because he doesn't want anybody investigating January the 6th. So he turned against it, and then the Republican leadership flipped over and turned against it. I think you voted against that commission. Why did you vote against that commission?
For many of the reasons that I've discussed today, that the focus on January 6th, the obsession
so you don't want to know.
Is unwarranted.
You don't want to know anymore.
Look, I think we have.
Okay, let me ask you about that.
We have a process in Article 3 where the courts get to determine those issues. If the United States government brings charges, people can resolve those in the courts.
You don't want to know.
That's not okay with you guys because you want
Mr.
to politicize it because you.
I know you too well for this. You don't want to know the answer. You don't want to know.
You guys don't have an answer.
So let me,
The issue's
Mr. Gates, let me ask you. Let me ask you a serious question.
The stenographer is trying to take people's words down, and she can't if everybody talks over each other. So
our apologies to the stenographer.
Okay,
we're going to do it civilly, like 2 lawyers. Okay, Mr. Gates, let me ask you this. Let's say that the exact same attack had taken place. Let's assume 145 of our officers were beaten in the face with baseball bats, steel pipes, Confederate battle flags, etc. Let's say they interrupted the counting of electoral college votes for the first time in American history for 4 or 5 hours. Let's say marauders, insurrectionists came into our building and chanted for hanging Vice President Mike Pence. But let's just change the hypothetical. This one element, Mr. Gates. Let's say it wasn't the Proud Boys. Let's say it wasn't the Oath Keepers. Let's say it wasn't the 3 Percenters. Let's say it wasn't the Aryan Nations. Let's say it was Al-Qaeda or ISIS. Would you really not want an investigation into what happened with that attack on America?
If Al-Qaeda or ISIS attacked the U.S. Capitol, I would think that the least capable institution to bring them to justice would be this January 6th committee.
You would not want...
I would far prefer the legal process to play out or the military process to play out. If the American people had to rely on the Congress itself as an institution to protect us from ISIS without law enforcement, without the military, we would be in deep, deep trouble.
Okay, is that a new position for you and Mr. Jordan? Because I know you guys
it's a
have
new
been involved.
hypothetical.
Yeah, you've been involved in a lot of different investigations, both of you. For example, does Benghazi ring a bell?
I was, I believe, a law student at the Great William and Mary Law School.
All right, well, but before I come to Mr. Jordan, let me ask you this.
They did after the Nation of
Do you
Islam
think that
attacked the
people
Capitol
who
after
are
January 6th.
subpoenaed
Nobody
by a
talks
court or
about
by
it.
the United States Congress, who think in their head that they might have a privilege or someone else might have a privilege, have the right just not to show up?
I believe that people have the right to allow the legal process to resolve whether
but you know
or not
how that
they're
works, Mr.
obligated
Gates.
to
You're a
appear.
lawyer. You know how that
Very
works.
much so.
You
You
show
know
up.
it works too.
Wait a second,
You know
Mr.
that
Gates. Wait, hold on. Let's try to educate the public here.
Please.
Because people need to know. If you're subpoenaed, you go. If you think you have a privilege, for example, let's say Steve Bannon says, you know what, I'm guilty as hell. I don't want to testify against myself. In America, you don't have to. The Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination says, I plead the Fifth. I might incriminate myself, but you know what? You got to go. And you got to answer each specific question. Some of them might implicate your Fifth Amendment rights, and some of them might not. Even if he thinks he's got, in some surreal parallel universe, a presidential executive privilege, even though he didn't even work for the White House at that point. He'd been fired by Donald Trump in August of 2017. This is in January of 2021, in December of 2020. But even if he thought that, he's got to come before the committee, and he has to plead it. Do you not agree with that?
No, I think that...
No, honestly, do you not agree with that?
Hold on, Mr. Raskin, I allowed you to speak, and I didn't interrupt you. I hope I'm given the same opportunity.
Just give me the honest answer.
The honest answer is that the McGahn litigation that you and I both followed closely as members of the Judiciary Committee actually is the path forward. McGahn didn't have to show up to assert that he was waiting for legal...
The president asserted executive privilege on his behalf.
Now you're the one giving challenges to the stenographer. So,
no, I'm telling you, wait a second. I'm going to elaborate on your answer here.
But I haven't even given my full answer yet.
That's not how it works in the Rules Committee, Mr. Gates. Just follow this then.
Well, wait
the president.
Do I get to respond to these?
Mr. Gates, I'm going to give you the chance to respond.
Well, it doesn't
Respond
sound like it. Sounds like you
President
monologue
Trump
and then
asserted
complain about the
executive privilege.
stenographer if I respond.
President Trump asserted executive privilege for McGahn. President Biden has not asserted.
I believe there is.
Has not asserted executive privilege.
President Trump has initiated litigation. Look, the reason you all waited on McGahn is because the Russia hoax wasn't going well for you. And the reason you're not waiting now is because you have no other legislation or other solutions for the country.
All right,
That's why
Mr. Jordan, let me switch to you.
You had the McGahn playbook, but you've ditched it because you guys need January 6th so bad.
Okay, Mr. Jordan, let me come to you. You're a lawyer too, right? Okay, I thought you'd gone to law school.
I went to law school, never took the bar exam.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, gotcha. My dad never took the bar either. So, do you oppose the use of criminal contempt charges against people who refuse to testify before Congress?
No, we've used it. I mean, we contempt Lois Lerner after a year of hearings and investigation.
You sure did, didn't you? You said the U.S.
Lerner.
attorney had a legal duty to go to the grand jury, didn't you?
Well, it says shall. When the Congress voted for contempt, it says shall go to the grand jury. That U.S. attorney didn't.
That's right. And you also said the U.S. attorney unilaterally decided to ignore the will of the House of Representatives.
It's true.
You said Mr. Manchin was legally bound to convene a grand jury, but indeed he ignored his obligation and unilaterally decided to ignore the will of the House of Representatives. Don't you think it's important that when we're exercising our Article I powers to get the evidence we need in order to legislate, that people obey the subpoenas of the United States House of Representatives? You used to believe that, Mr. Jordan. Do you no longer believe that?
Once a legitimate investigation, sure.
All right.
Sure.
In 2012, the Oversight Committee approved a resolution holding Attorney General Holder in contempt of Congress. Do you remember that one?
Say it again. I was thinking I was going to elaborate on the answer when you cut me off to ask me the question again.
Well, continue, Mr. Jordan, because everybody's always violating your rights, so I'm going to give you all the time you want.
No one's violating my rights.
Okay. Well, look, let me remind you what you said when Attorney General Holder was held in criminal contempt of Congress. We simply want the facts, Because Attorney General Eric Holder will not provide what the law requires, we are left with no other option except to hold him in contempt. We're doing the exact same thing, Mr. Jordan, with all the bluster about the border and all the other nonsense you're talking about, Russia and everything. We are holding him in contempt for violating a subpoena of the United States House of Representatives.
There wasn't some special select committee that Republicans were not permitted to serve on that issued those subpoenas. That's not the case.
All right, well, let's close with this.
Oversight
Mr.
Committee
Jordan, why
and the
did you vote
Judiciary
against
Committee.
the commission of 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats equals subpoena power? Why did you oppose that? Are you also not interested in what happened to us on January 6th?
Of course, everyone is interested in holding people accountable who did wrong. The FBI is doing that. The Justice Department is doing that appropriately. So what I'm not interested in
So why did you have all those Benghazi investigations if you don't think Congress should be investigating?
Because Hillary Clinton misled the American people.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back to you. I yield back to you, Mr. Chairman.
If you want to...
and Hillary testified, by the way, before the United States House of Representatives for how many hours?
9 hours, I think.
I also just want to say for the record, I mean, the Mueller report gets brought up and people keep on saying that.
I just want to point out a couple of things here. You can see how frustrated they are because they're not like, this is all a sham. Any Democrat that's watching this right now, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. You seriously, you ought to be ashamed of yourself for voting in these people. They don't care about getting to the truth. You can tell that. You can tell by just watching it and just listening to it. They don't care about getting to the truth. They're not trying to let Gates or the other guy, I forget his name right now. They're Jim, whatever his name is. They're not trying to let them speak. They're every time they ask them a question, they cut them off. It's very frustrating to me to watch, but we got to show it.
And I thought that we were here to speak about a very specific resolution, and I would hope that our conversation would stay to that. But thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Yeah, I was hoping it would stay on that subject too, but we covered a lot of different territory here. Ms. Scanlon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too am trying to catch the signal, not the noise. So the Rules Committee is here to consider a resolution to find Steve Bannon in contempt for refusing to comply with a congressional subpoena to testify about what he knows about the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. Am I correct, Mr. Jordan, that you are here because you oppose finding of the resolution to find Steve Bannon in contempt of the congressional subpoena?
Yes.
Okay, how about you, Mr. Gates? Are you here because you oppose finding Steve Bannon in the resolution to find Steve Bannon in contempt?
Yes, and I think that's because he hasn't actively defied it so much as he's asked for a question of law to be resolved.
So you disagree with the underlying facts, perhaps. Mr. Jordan, in passing, you also mentioned that you object to the January 6th committee subpoenaing organizers of the January 6th rally about whether they spoke with members of Congress about the rally or the attack on the Capitol. Is that right?
Yeah, I pointed out in my opening statement. You got 11 individuals whose names on some application, and then they're going to get called in, deposed. Many of them are 20-some-year-old staffers.
And some of them actually organized the rally with the White House. I do appreciate the fact that both of you have acknowledged here today that Joe Biden is the president, although I find your repeated endorsement of demonstrably false conspiracy theories about the 2020 election to be both uninformed and unpatriotic. But I appreciate that you both did acknowledge that Joe Biden is the president. I have to assume you also acknowledge that former presidents lose the power to pardon once they leave office. Would that be correct?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Morelli.
Thank you, Ms. Chair. I don't have any questions, but I do find, I think, the characterization of as an assault on their First Amendment rights simply by asking people information about that they may have that may be relevant to an investigation about attacks on the United States Capitol to be sort of extraordinary. I gather, and I'm no expert in this, that every single day in America, law enforcement and people ask folks in all manner of investigations for information. I don't know that I've ever heard it described as an attack, an assault on First Amendment rights. I think, we have to balance interests always, certainly, but I think asking for information that may be relevant, and there's no suggestion that the committee has just gone through the phone book to inquire or to ask information people. I notice a lot of members don't know how to control their volume button on this committee. We may have to have a technical session.
That wasn't me this time.
No disrespect meant to the gentleman from Oklahoma either.
Yeah, I apologize.
No, I struggle with it myself. I would include myself in that instruction. But I've not heard that described, and so I'm not sure what the assault on First Amendment's rights, that seems to be a big deal, but I haven't heard anything here that indicates that any such assault exists. I also, and I'll just close with this, I've also not heard a single rationale why Mr. Bannon should not be compelled to testify before the congressional committee. There's a section of the U.S. Code, which we've talked about, which suggests that you have to answer a subpoena. I think my colleagues who are learned members of the bar have discussed what happens in the case of a subpoena when you assert certain privileges, that there are standards to be followed. I haven't heard anyone say why he shouldn't. And frankly, not sure what the sanction would be. If people just decided to ignore the Congress and to ignore subpoenas and there was no sanction available, what would we do? So should we stop holding oversight hearings? Should we stop convening? Should we stop issuing subpoenas? Because once this happens, Mr. Bannon is successful in not having his testimony compelled. I'm not sure what that would say for the party of law and order to suggest that somehow ignoring subpoenas by the Congress of the United States is something that can be routinely done. I'm not sure that there's any point in us ever holding a hearing again or ever issuing subpoenas to compel information or testimony to come forward. And frankly, one of the most important fundamental issues we've ever confronted, which is a physical, violent assault on the United States Capitol. I'm almost at a loss for words to understand, but I just go back to it. I haven't heard a single thing. I've heard a lot of conversation here, a lot of going back and forth. I've not heard a single rationale why Mr. Bannon should, and frankly, if he doesn't know anything, comes forward and says, I don't know it, I have no information at all. Okay, I'm not sure why you wouldn't just do that, but clearly, because there's other issues here that have nothing to do with rights or assertions of executive privilege. This is the politics of Steve Bannon, I get it. And wants to be a controversial figure, and he's managed to get pardons before. Maybe he figures somebody will pardon him in the future. I don't know, but I'll support the underlying rule and the resolution. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. DeSagne. Here. Ms. Ross.
I have no further questions, and I'm even more committed to my vote for the rule and the resolution.
Mr. Neguse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief. I don't want to belabor the point. Two particular things that I guess I wanted to just raise, both of which I think Mr. Raskin touched on. First, I understand if folks want to distinguish the facts of prior instances of contempt citations that have been issued by the Congress versus today. I get that. But I would hope that folks would spare me and spare the committee these hollow arguments about criminalization of these proceedings. And for precisely the reasons Representative Raskin noted, I was not here in 2012 when the Congress approved a contempt citation against former Attorney General Eric Holder, but the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee certainly was, as was the ranking member of the Rules Committee, both of whom voted in favor of it. I was not here in 2014 when Lois Lerner was held in contempt by the Congress, but again, I say that many other members of this committee and those who are testifying today certainly were and are fully aware that the Congress has used this tool in the past. So that's just first and foremost, I think, important context. Secondly, my colleague from Florida noted my phrase of complete and total defiance and took issue with that characterization. It is undoubtedly complete and total defiance for precisely the reason that Representative Raskin noted, which is to say, if Mr. Bannon believes that there are immunities or privileges available to him that he wishes to assert, he is welcome to come and testify before the Select Committee and assert those privileges, as any other witness is able to do. If he believes that there are documents that he has in his possession that are protected by executive privilege, he is welcome to work with his counsel to identify those documents and produce a privilege log attesting to that fact, and in addition, produce the remainder of the documents which are not subject to the privilege. But we heard from Chairman Thompson and Vice Chair Cheney very clearly is that this particular witness has chosen to do none of those things. Instead, he's chosen to simply say, I will not participate in any interview, in any deposition, in any testimony. I won't produce any documents. That is defiance of the subpoena, and it's precisely why we're considering the resolution that we're considering today, and certainly why I'll be supporting it. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. No further questions. Let me just say, that our meeting here today really was about one thing, and that's getting to the truth about what happened on January 6th. And we heard a lot of bluster. We heard a lot of talk about all kinds of things, some totally unrelated to what we're talking about here today. But that's not what I'm going to remember most about this hearing today. And what I'm going to remember most is that before this panel, we had a chair and a vice chair, a Democrat and a Republican, sit there and despite disagreeing on virtually every single issue under the sun, came together in support of defending our democracy. And I think what they did is what patriots do. What public servants do, and what it's about putting our country before party. And I'm worried. I think a lot of us are worried about the future, about our future, about the state of our democracy. But actually, moments like we witnessed earlier actually fill me with hope. I wish more of our colleagues would join them, and I look at this not as an opportunity to defend one person, but to defend something greater, this Congress, the Constitution, and our democracy. So I appreciate both of you being here, and you are free to go. And anybody else wanting to testify? Hearing none, then that closes the hearing portion, and I now will yield to the gentlelady from California and entertain a motion from the gentlewoman, Mrs. Torres.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee provide for consideration of the resolution accompanying House Report 117-152 under a closed rule. The rule provides that if House Report 117-152 is called up by direction of the Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol, all points of order against the report shall be waived and it shall be considered as read. The rule provides 1 hour debate equally divided among and controlled by Representative Thompson of Mississippi, Representative Cheney of Wyoming, and an opponent or their respective designees. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the resolution accompanying the report. Finally, the rule provides that the resolution accompanying the report shall be considered as read.
And I want to thank the gentleman for her motion, but before we go to a vote, I just want to recognize that this will be the last and the final Rules Committee meeting for our digital director, Mary Lieb, who is leaving this week. Many of us are used to seeing her here taking photos during our meetings. She's here. Where did she go? Oh, there she is, right there in front of me. Right. Okay. But there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes, as we all know, and she has been invaluable as we transitioned to remote committee work at the height of the COVID pandemic, and she helped many other committees too. She's not done yet because we're putting her to work reading the roll today. But Mary, I think I speak for all of us here when I say that we're going to miss you and we wish you all the best. And from the bottom of our hearts, we thank you for your service here. So thank you. And with that, the vote is now on the motion from the gentlewoman from California. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
No. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
I'm not requesting recorded vote.
A recorded vote has been requested. Clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Torres? Aye. Mrs. Torres, aye. Mr. Perlmutter?
Aye.
Mr. Perlmutter, aye. Mr. Raskin? Mr. Raskin?
I vote aye.
Mr. Raskin, aye. Ms. Scanlon? Aye. Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Morelli?
Aye.
Mr. Morelli, aye. Mr. DeSaulnier?
Aye.
Mr. DeSaulnier, aye. Ms. Ross?
Aye.
Ms. Ross, aye. Mr. Neguse?
Aye.
Mr. Neguse, aye. Mr. Cole?
No.
Mr. Cole, no. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Reschenthaler?
No.
Mr. Reschenthaler, no. Ms. Fishbach? No. Ms. Fishbach, no. Mr. Chairman?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
Clerk, report the total.
9 yeas, 4 nays.
The motion is agreed to. I will carry this for the Democrats.
And Ms. Fishbach will carry it for the Republicans.
And so without objection, the committee stands adjourned. Thank you.
Don't expect another meeting.
No, I hope not.
Stupid. Waste of time. The more I watch this stuff, the more I think every single person that's in office right now needs to be removed. Every single person in office. The more I watch the bickering and squabbling back and forth is the more I believe that every single person needs to be gone. It's crazy. Crazy, crazy, crazy. We've got some breaking news out of Florida right now. It looks like human remains may have been found, or they're not saying human remains yet. What they're saying is that, hold on, let me take that so the lighting's, it's not going to work. Brian Laundrie's belongings have been found in what they've been found. And it's really weird because they called off the investigation, they opened up the park, and then the parents go out there last night, and then all of a sudden now they find remains, or they find belongings. So they've got cadaver dogs, they've got tons of FBI agents, they've got tons of sheriffs, they've got tons of people that are there. Jack Posobiec or whatever on Twitter, he's saying federal officials tell Human Events that Brian Laundrie's belongings found in what investigators believe may be a shallow grave, and they're highly suspicious of the parents who just happened to find the items. Again, it's very odd. The parents go out there after the FBI has been scouring this area, and the parents are only out there for a few hours, and then they find something. They find belongings belonging to them. It's very peculiar to me. So I'll be following that. Not sure if there's anything else worth listening to. The House is currently voting on something, but there's a lot of no votes, actually. Yeah, there's still a lot of no votes because, the politicians don't do their jobs. They just wait around. Let me see now, because it's 1:30. I thought that hearing would come back, because I thought they said they were going to be doing an hour of debate, but I guess it was closed debate for some reason. So they shut down, or they adjourned that committee meeting, which is pretty interesting if you're interested in stupid stuff. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to end my live stream for now. The Drinkin' Bros American Party podcast is on YouTube. I'm going to go over there and listen to that podcast because I really enjoy it. I put the link in the chat. Why don't you guys join me over there? Show some support for those guys because they are awesome. The link is in your chat. That's the Drinkin' Bros American Party podcast. Go over there. I'm going to be in their chat. Thank you, everyone, for watching. We'll see you tonight.